Single Malt Drama, a mafia romantic comedy. Bourbon Street Bad Boys Club, Book 3. Written by Kathryn M Hearst. Narrated by Charlotte Claremont and Aaron Shedlock. Chapter 1. Marco. The movies got it all wrong. Scarface, The Godfather, Goodfellas were great flicks, but they only showed the splashy side of the mafia. In reality, the day-to-day operations created a metric assload of paperwork. Depending on the day, there were contracts to write, business acquisitions to oversee, and lawsuits. Always a new freaking lawsuit. That's where I came in. Marco Cesare Marchionni, attorney for the mob, or my family's part of it anyway. On paper, the Marchionni Corporation was a multi-billion-dollar enterprise with hotels, restaurants, and bars on all 7 continents. But, like the movies, the reality didn't live up to the hype. The majority of our properties would have gone under years ago, if not for the river of profits from other mafiosis' illegal activities. After Joe, my eldest brother, was murdered, Gabe had taken his place as capo of the family, and my workload had quadrupled. Not because he'd earned himself a seat at the mafia's version of the big boys table or the fratellanza. That would have been too easy. Nope, Gabe had decided to get us out of the mob, which was a good thing, except for the paperwork. Granted, my current office was a pool deck overlooking the Mediterranean Sea, and I'd traded in my suit and tie for board shorts. However, I had a lot more to worry about than checking items off my to-do list. One mistake, real or imagined, could mean blowing up an already escalating mob war. Gabe clamped a hand on my shoulder. How's it going? I added another name to the ever-growing list of companies to dump and set the laptop aside. If we get rid of anything that isn't turning a profit without dirty money, we're looking at selling 75% of our holdings. That's less than I was expecting. Frowning, he glanced over the water. My entire fam-damly had come to Sicily for Gabe's wedding, but what was supposed to be a 2-week vacation had turned into an indefinite stay. I, for one, was ready to get back to my regularly scheduled life in New Orleans. However, that couldn't happen until Gabe brokered a peace agreement with the other mob families. How's Pops? My father lived on borrowed time. Stage 4 lung cancer had seen to that. While I'd never call our relationship close, watching him suffer sucked. Not to mention, sitting around waiting for him to die made me feel like an asshole. He's resting. It's been an eventful morning. So I heard. What was with all the shouting? I love my big fat Italian family, but I often wish they came with a mute button. Gabe scratched his jaw. Enzo royally screwed up. Between his tone and the mention of our brother, my heart rate picked up speed. A couple of rival mob families had a problem with us walking away from the Cosa Nostra. One capo in particular demanded an ungodly payoff. Time to make alternative arrangements for his money laundering needs and for Enzo to marry his daughter. Praying my brother's mistake didn't have anything to do with him going through with the wedding to Nicolina Lazio, I asked, fucked up how? He forgot to turn off the security cameras before he and Shauna got creative with a bottle of wine. Gabe cracked a grin. The feeds from the mansion go directly to Marchionni Corp's security offices. My God, anyone with clearance can access the recordings. I could only imagine the hilarity that had ensued when the security team got a look at Enzo's do-it-yourself porno. Yep, needless to say, Ma had a fit. I feel bad for Shauna. Ma had a problem with her from the moment she set foot in this house. I thought she'd pop an aneurysm when she found out you'd sent Enzo back to New Orleans with her. I felt bad for Enzo as well, but for different reasons. His heart had always been 3 sizes too small, but it had grown when he'd met Shauna. Gabe chuckled. Enzo will do what he wants, regardless of Ma's feelings on the matter, but Shauna's liable to put his balls in a jar when she finds out about this. If she doesn't, I'd say it's true love. I admired his optimism, but to quote Tina Turner, what's love got to do with it? Does it matter? The situation with the Lazios isn't going away. Gabe's expression darkened. Like I've said before, we aren't living in a Jane fucking Austen novel. I'm not selling our brother's hand in marriage to get the rest of us out of the business. I appreciated his sentiment, even if it was naive. For what it's worth, Nico doesn't want the marriage either. Gabe smirked. She sure as hell acted like it. Did she? I wiggled my brows. For once, being in the friend zone had its advantages. Namely, Nico had confided in me. 1, she hung on Enzo like an ornament. 2, she was homicidally jealous of Shauna. 3, his eyes widened, and the proverbial light bulb came on over his head. You mean to tell me she was behaving like a 2-year-old coming off a sugar bender because she didn't want to be with Enzo? I tapped the side of my nose. Never let anyone make you think you don't have a brain beneath all that long, flowing hair. He flipped me the finger. Now that you mention it, her behavior did seem over the top. What can I say? None of you know her like I do. I'd worship the ground Nicolina Lazio's red-souled Christian Louboutins walked on since I stopped believing girls had cooties. What man in his right mind wouldn't? Nico was a model, a wannabe fashion designer, and had a whip-sharp sense of humor. Unfortunately for me, she'd friend-zoned me at the age of 9. Back then, she preferred older men, namely my brothers. By the time she came of age, my mother and Nico's father had decided she was best suited for Enzo. I absolutely disagreed, but I hadn't gotten a vote. Until now. Stretching out on the lounge chair, I placed my hands behind my head. Nico could marry another Marchionni. He winked, but the tension in his jaw ruined the effect. You'd throw our baby brother under the bus? Dante's still in grad school, and I'm not sure he's had his first kiss, let alone dated. Joking or not, Gabe wasn't completely wrong about Dante. While I'd spent more time playing the field than Babe Ruth, Mickey Mantle, and Hank Aaron combined, our baby brother had warmed the bench. Mostly. I met Gabe's gaze and used my professional attorney voice. One of us has to marry the supermodel. I'm willing to take one for the team. He folded his arms and gave me a look that reminded me way too much of our father. No one in this family is marrying Nicolina Lazio. Capisci? Capisco. I understood he wanted to protect us, but that didn't mean I agreed with him. Someone had to do what was best for the family, and it looked like that someone would be me. My phone dinged with an incoming text. I checked the screen and shot upright. Speaking of the devil in Prada, Gabe arched a brow. Is that panic on your face because of business or pleasure? It's personal. I stood and waved the phone. I need to make a call. Are we done here? As long as you stay the hell away from Nico, we're good. No can do, bro. Sure, whatever. I offered a solution, you declined. What do I care? He gave me a curious expression and walked into the house. Shoving my feet in my shoes, I hit redial. Nico answered in the first ring. Marco, thank God. Are you alone? I'm working on it. I grabbed my towel and headed down the steep path to the beach. What's going on? I'm not sure what changed, but my father just announced mine and Enzo's wedding date. She sounded tired and stuffy as if she'd been crying. It's in 5 days. Keeping my voice low, I said, let's just say my parents got an eyeful of how much Enzo likes Shauna Isaac this morning. Oh. She went quiet. What the hell? Is she upset he's with another woman? Does she have feelings for him after all? This only proves my point, Nico sighed. Enzo and I can't go through with this wedding. We will both end up miserable and bitter. I wanted to run an idea past her, but it didn't seem like the right time. Then again, was it ever a good idea to propose over the phone? I know, Nick, I know. But what are you going to do? I went with my father to speak to our priest this morning. My brain stopped working, so much so I tripped over a rock and nearly face-planted. You spoke to the man who's going to marry you to my brother? Yes, she lowered her voice. But he cannot perform the ceremony if there is no bride. Pinching the bridge of my nose, I said, I'm not following you. I pretended to go along with it. When my father dismissed me, I made up an excuse. I needed to see the baker. Instead, I went to visit Maria and Alessio. Your old nanny and groundskeeper? I remembered the couple. They'd practically raised her after her mother had passed away. Yes, I told them a little of what is happening, and they have agreed to help me escape. This time, my brain not only stopped working, but smoke seeped from my ears. Are you crazy? Your father will have them and everyone they love murdered. They're leaving Trapani. Her voice thinned. I'm going to help them join their family in America. I hated this idea more than I hated her father for putting her in this position. Do you even have a plan? Alessio and Maria are meeting me on the beach with a boat, but it is too small to get to the airport in Pantelleria fast enough, which is why I need your help. I'm happy to smuggle them into the U.S., and afterward, I'll whisk you away to some exotic corner of the world, preferably a corner with a clothing-optional beach. Truer words had never been spoken. I wasn't exactly a happily ever after kind of guy, but a few months with Nico's legs wrapped around my waist wouldn't suck. This is not the time for jokes, she sighed. Who's joking? Sorry, go on. Remember when you said to call you if I needed anything? Oh boy. Yes?
I need you to meet us off the coast of Formica tomorrow morning. Please, tell me you have access to your family's yacht.
I do. If I can convince Gabe to let me off the compound long enough to meet her, I'd find a way. I had to. I'd always been a sucker for a damsel in distress, especially when that damsel was Nico. What time?
They are meeting me before sunrise.
I did some quick mental math. The trip to Trapani was nothing to sneeze at. Even at cruising speed, it would take 6 or 7 hours to reach her. If I was late, she'd be a sitting duck. Formica is too exposed. Go to our secret place on Levanzo. We can hide Alessio's boat in the cave. The memory of the first time we'd run away from home together crossed my mind. We had been 10 or 11 years old and determined to escape our overbearing families. The 2 days we'd spent on the tiny Agadian island had been amazing, at least until my father's men had found us by tracking my phone.
Don't forget to turn off your cell this time,
Nico laughed. Ha ha. Are you sure about this?
I have never been more sure.
I absolutely hated this plan. She was taking an enormous risk by defying her father. I didn't want to think about what would happen if she was caught trying to escape. Nick, I hate to state the obvious, but airports, ferry terminals, and train stations are the first place your father will look. She sighed.
I know, but I'm praying he'll search larger places first. If so, we will make it to Pantelleria before his men.
Pietro Lazio had an army of employees at his disposal. Some would undoubtedly head to the island. There was no way in hell we would arrive before them. No yacht could outrun a helicopter. Forget Pantelleria. I'm bringing you back here and putting you on the Marchionni Corporation jet. No Lazio would dare set foot in Comiso, not with the current tensions. Current tensions was putting it mildly. A couple of weeks ago, someone had fired shots over Enzo's head. A few days later, armed men had been apprehended in the crowd at Gabe's wedding. The escalating violence wasn't restricted to Sicily. It had spilled over to New Orleans. Enzo's restaurant had been ransacked, and his girlfriend's apartment had been burned down. While Pietro Lazio denied any involvement, my brothers and I believed he'd issued the orders.
Think about it. It's summer. There are thousands of boats around the islands.
Yes, but...
No buts. My father has spies everywhere, even in Comiso. If he found out I left Sicily on your family's plane...
Nico went quiet.
It's better if you only take us to Pantelleria.
Rather than argue, I decided to table the conversation. I'd have hours at sea to change her mind. Promise me you'll be careful.
I promise.
She drew a breath.
I will text you from my burner phone once we are offshore.
And before you leave the house. Reluctant to end the call, I said, we could put Maria and Alessio on the plane, and we could take the yacht to Malta, Santorini. I hear Cyprus is nice this time of year.
There is no we, Marco. I have to get them to the United States, and then I must disappear. Alone.
Yep, I hated this plan. Can you at least tell me where you're going?
It's probably best if I don't tell you everything.
Nico sighed again.
I should go.
I stared at the phone after she disconnected. One way or another, sweetheart, I'm going to convince you to become my wife. For a few months, anyway.
Chapter 2. Nicolina. Elliptical machines were great cardio, but let's be honest, working out in a gym doesn't prepare a girl for the real world, not when said girl is running for her life from the very people who should protect her. I reached the edge of the manicured lawn and took one last glance back at my ancestral home. Portions of the rough stone walls had been built in the 12th century as part of a military fortress. Fitting, considering the mansion had been my prison since I had the misfortune of being born into the Lazio family. "Nico, stop!" My brother, Giancarlo, charged across the grass. I half ran and half slid down the stony cliff leading to the Mediterranean Sea. As a child, I'd played on these rocks. I knew the terrain, where to step, where to avoid, and how to win a race to the water's edge. More voices called after me, but I couldn't stop moving. Gravity, and my force of will, saw to that. My father's guards had joined my brother's efforts to bring me back inside. While they had guns and knew how to use them, I doubted they'd shoot me. Then again, the hideous wedding gown my father had ordered would hide most gunshot wounds. I reached the small private cove and picked up my pace. Thigh muscles screaming, I sprinted across the shore toward freedom. Though I had no earthly idea what my life would be like in a month, a year, a decade, I much preferred to look at the situation as running toward something new, as opposed to running away from home. Someone fired a warning shot over my head, but I didn't slow. I had one chance at escape, and I intended to take it. The alternative was more than I could bear. A lifetime married to a man I didn't love. Alessio stood ramrod straight at the water's edge. He wore his hat pulled down with the brim obscuring his face, and his clothes were a few sizes too big, as if he'd stuffed his shirt to disguise his slight frame. "Nico!" His bulging eyes and sagging jowls reminded me of a pug, a very frightened pug. "Sbrigati!" I pleaded with him to hurry. He stared at the armed men descending the cliff behind me. "Andiamo!" Without slowing, I grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the waiting boat. Once he snapped out of his shock, the weathered old groundskeeper had me in the rickety vessel and speeding away from the shoreline before I could catch my breath. "Grazie mille." I couldn't bring myself to look back. There was nothing for me in that house, or with my family. Nothing but expectations, duty, and a business relationship disguised as a marriage. Alessio nodded once. Like me, he hadn't glanced back at the shore. Some people were like that. They preferred to look forward rather than watching what was coming for them. Peeking her head out from beneath the tarp, Maria spoke in the only language she knew, Sicilian. "Is it safe?" "Stay down, please. Just a little longer." Crouching over her, I used my body to protect hers. I owed them so much. My mother had died while giving birth to me, and Maria had cared for me. With my brothers away at boarding school and my father consumed with work, if it wasn't for Maria and Alessio, I would have been forgotten and unloved. It killed me to think of the trouble I'd brought upon them. No one in Trapani, or Sicily for that matter, would dare risk running afoul of my father. Pietro Lazio, the head of one of the 5 ruling families of the Cosa Nostra, was the most ruthless of the remaining mafia bosses. Maria and Alessio helped me because they loved me, a fact that both warmed and chilled my bones. Maria tugged my sleeve. "We found a bag in the rocks. Is that all you are bringing?" "It is for you." I'd stolen from my father, but I'd had no choice. I'd given Alessio and Maria part of my allowance and modeling money since my father had fired them for being too old to do their jobs. Once I disappeared, they would have no one to help keep food on their table or a roof over their heads. Maria opened the zipper, gasped, and shook her head. "It is too much. You must keep some for yourself." "I will take a little." I knew better than to argue. She'd stuff my pockets with euros when I wasn't looking if I didn't keep some money for myself. Alessio shouted over the roar of the engine and the waves, "Will you leave with us in Ohio?" Not trusting my voice, I shook my head. "Where will you go?" Maria grasped my hand, and I helped her to a bench seat. "A safe place, far from here." I had a loose plan, but everything depended on getting them to safety. After that, I wasn't sure where I'd end up. "Thank you for helping me." She patted my hand. "There is no need to thank us. You are like a daughter to us. We would lay down our lives for you." I prayed it wouldn't come to that. We traveled the rest of the 12 kilometers from my family home to the rendezvous point in silence. Levanzo was little more than a big rock with a fishing village dropped on it. As I'd hoped, the warm weather brought out tourists and locals alike. Boats of all shapes and sizes littered the shallow waters. As kids, Marco and I had spent countless summers exploring the shoreline. Though I hadn't visited our secret place in years, I remembered the way to the hidden cave. Alessio slowed as we rounded the peninsula on the northwest side of the island. There, see the tall rock? I pointed toward the rugged shore. It's just on the other side. Keeping his eyes on the water, he asked, "Are you frightened for yourself or for us?" I dipped my chin. Both. I don't think my brothers were close enough to recognize you, but if my father finds out you helped me... A broad grin split his face. They did not notice me in all the years I worked for your father. Now I am one of thousands of faceless old men. I do not worry they recognized me. That makes one of us. Maria offered me a smile that reminded me of happier days. Why did you leave? The entire story. Not only what you think we can handle. We are old, not stupid. I debated, sugarcoating it. But I had a shot at a new life. I didn't want to build it on a foundation of more lies. Lately, I'd been so dishonest I could barely remember what was fact and what was fiction. I was ordered to marry Enzo Marchionni. Alessio tilted his head. He is a good man? He's a wonderful man. For someone else. My behavior toward Enzo over the previous few months had been reprehensible. He had every right to hate me, but I prayed he would find it in his heart to forgive me once he learned the truth. Maria gave me a knowing look. He was never the Marchionni your heart wanted. My heart doesn't want any of them. Marco and I are just friends. Even if I did, things would never work out between us. Marco was a player. Plus, I didn't believe for a second Gabe would be able to break free from the mafia. No matter how sweet Marco was now, the business had a way of changing men. I hadn't left an overbearing father to be with an overbearing boyfriend or husband. Thankfully, Alessio interrupted the conversation. Is that Marco? I shielded my eyes and squinted at the pocket yacht anchored nearest to the entrance of the cave. We were still too far away for me to read the writing on the stern. I'm not sure. I will move closer, but you must hide. He motioned for me to get down. I cringed at the brownish water sloshing around and sank to my hands and knees. This is what my life has come to, crouching in filth. Maria draped the tarp over me. The disgusting fabric smelled worse than the bilge water. I remained as still as possible when Alessio accelerated through the choppy waters. The faster we went, the more the foul liquid splashed. If we didn't reach the yacht soon, I'd need to take a dip in the sea or Marco wouldn't be able to stand my stench. A horn blew 3 times, and male voices carried over the waves. Alessio removed the tarp and helped me to my feet. These are our rescuers, yes? Maria chuckled. Of course it is. Don't you recognize them? They are men now. The last time I saw them, they were boys. He continued, muttering under his breath. Grinning at their bickering, I waved to the brothers. Marco was the only person I could think of to help me, and the next to the last person my father would ever suspect. Marco and Dante were only a year apart in age and were often mistaken for twins. They had the same dark curly hair, startling green eyes, and olive complexion as the rest of their siblings, but that's where the similarities ended. Dante, the youngest of the 5 surviving Marchionni boys, rarely smiled. He had a cool, calculating way about him that made me nervous. Marco, on the other hand, where do I start with Marco? His expression reminded me of someone who knew the punchline to every joke. He was usually grinning, and he always looked like he was thinking of sex. Not surprising. He had a lot of it. I turned my attention to the 2 men coming alongside the fishing boat in a dinghy. While Dante didn't seem thrilled to see me, he managed not to scowl. Nico. Hi, Dante. Thank you for coming. Grunting his reply, he helped Maria, Alessio, and their bags onto the dinghy. Marco climbed into the boat with me.
I'll wait with you.
Thank you. I seated myself on the bench and pulled the brim of my ball cap down.
Any trouble getting away?
Nodding, I said, Giancarlo and a handful of bodyguards followed me to the beach. Marco sat beside me and slung his arm around my shoulders. The tension in his body seemed unnatural. He was normally the life of the party, laughing and telling jokes, dirty jokes. We have a good head start. I nudged his side, desperate for him to tell me everything would be all right. Scanning the area, he walked to the back of the boat.
I'm going to drop anchor. It'll make this floating heap of wood look like it belongs here.
Okay.
Arrange the tarp over the front seats, like you're drying it out.
His nervous energy was contagious. By the time Dante returned, I was ready to swim for the yacht. No one spoke as we climbed aboard the smaller vessel and sped away, but both men swiveled their heads back and forth as if waiting for the Kraken to rise up and devour us. When we reached the yacht, Dante hopped out of the boat, took my arm, and hoisted me from the gunwale to the swim platform. Maria and Alessio peered over the railing, watching us. Unlike the brothers, they seemed to be enjoying their adventure. Both wore smiles as wide as the horizon.
We have to hurry.
Marco moved behind me, placed his hands on my ass, and all but lifted me onto the deck. I arched a brow. Was that entirely necessary? Climbing up after me, he gave me an exaggerated shrug, winked, and took my hand. I glanced down, surprised by the gesture. Thank you for coming. I didn't know who else to call.
I'm glad I could help, but we need to get everyone out of the open.
He led us through an outdoor seating area into the sunroom with twin white couches and a large television. Next came the cockpit, with more seating and an impressive yet simple control panel. The yacht was nice, but it struck me as odd the Marchioni's boat was so much smaller than my father's. In fact, they seemed to live a much less lavish lifestyle than my family. Alessio leaned closer to get a better look at the 2 computerized screens, a dozen switches, a steering wheel, and 2 silver joysticks.
This is fancy. Welcome aboard.
Dante offered the couple a quick smile before turning back to the screens.
You should get below before we get underway.
I felt as if I should say something, but he hadn't as much as glanced at me. Thank you for your help.
Don't mention it. Don't mind him. He gets cranky if he's away from his computer for more than an hour or so.
Marco grinned and elbowed Dante in the ribs. He has every right to be upset. I've put you both in danger. The reality of the situation made my stomach hurt. Shaking his head, Dante mumbled,
I wouldn't have come along if I didn't want to be here. But the sooner we leave, the better.
Marco set his hand on the small of my back and led us down a short flight of stairs into another seating area, galley, and a stateroom at each end of the boat.
Home sweet home for the next few hours.
Maria and Alessio took in their surroundings. While both had worked for my father for decades, he'd never allow my nanny or his groundskeeper to go near any of his toys. Compared to the modest home they shared, the Marchionni yacht had to seem like a palace. Marco pointed to a closed door.
Alessio, you and Maria can take that cabin.
I turned to the couple. You should wash up and get some rest. We have quite a journey ahead of us. They exchanged glances. Alessio wiggled his brows, and Maria blushed before they hurried into the stateroom and closed the door. My mouth fell open. I vaguely remember them teasing and flirting when I was a child, but that had been so long ago I'd almost convinced myself they were saints. I mean, really, I thought of them as grandparents. No one wanted to imagine their nonni and nonna getting frisky.
What's the plan, Nico?
Where are you going after Pantelleria? Marco folded his arms. Gawking, I motioned to the closed cabin door. You're not even going to comment on what just happened? You? Miss a chance to make a dirty joke? He shook his head. I wasn't sure what to make of this side of him. He so rarely showed it. It's best you don't know. His brows climbed into his hairline. You have no idea where you're going after you get them settled, do you? Times like these, I hated that he knew me so well. I haven't decided. He winced and scratched his ear. The company jet is in Comiso. No! I refused to drag him deeper into this mess. It's one thing for the boat to be away from the harbor, but if the plane leaves too, it will be obvious you helped me. Marco tilted his head. Do you have cash? Nope. I'm broke, homeless, and smell like week-old fish guts. I had a mountain of money at my disposal, but I didn't dare access it. My father would undoubtedly be keeping tabs on any bank account and credit card activity. I have enough to get to New Orleans. The last time I was there, I hid a fake passport and the funds to get me to my final destination in a safe deposit box. How very James Bond of you. He spoke in a ridiculous British accent. A girl can never be too prepared. I couldn't help but smile. I knew it. He couldn't be serious for more than 5 minutes. You probably want a shower. Use the other cabin and make yourself at home. Marco looked me over and did his best to appear more amused than concerned. Self-conscious about my appearance and smell, I hurried to the vacant stateroom. I don't have any clean clothes. Following me, Marco reached over his shoulder and pulled his t-shirt over his head. I had a hard time bringing myself to look away from his rippling muscles. However, as much as I would have loved to get physical with Marco, I couldn't add another complication to my life. I'd always had a crush on him, but I'd known better than to pursue it. I'd have better luck catching moonlight in a jar than tying him down. I'll give you anything you need. He tossed the shirt at me. I hugged the still warm fabric to my chest. My God, he smells like sin. Let me guess, including the shirt off your back? And my jeans. He perused my lower half. Ignoring the flutters in my stomach, I squared my shoulders. I'm good with this, thank you. Okay, but if one of us is going to be running around without pants, I'd much rather it be you. Marco winked and walked back upstairs.
Chapter 3. Marco. Most people would consider speeding around the Italian coastline in a yacht with a beautiful woman a dream come true. While most people would be right, this particular dream had the capacity to turn into a nightmare quicker than I could pop the cork on a bottle of Dom Perignon. Buttoning my shirt, I joined Dante in the cockpit, took out a pair of binoculars, and scanned the Mediterranean Sea. This is a bad idea. My brother hardly ever complained, but he'd repeated the sentence 1,000,000 times since I'd told him about the rescue mission. I plopped into a captain's chair and answered the same way I had 1,000,000 times before. I know, but she needs our help. Dante gave me side-eye. Where are we taking her? She wants to go to Pantelleria. Is that wise? No, it's not. I mentally ran through the small coastal towns within a few hours of Sicily and came up empty. How far north in the mainland can we get and still be home by dawn? Dawn? Are you serious? I thought we agreed to tell Gabe we went fishing. We'd need a plausible explanation for our absence. Where would 2 young, attractive, single men go after escaping the family compound? To find women. Sure, we went fishing and then decided to have a few drinks. Can we make it as far north as Vibo Marina and get to Taormina before midnight-ish? Dante narrowed his eyes. Yeah, if you want to circle the entire fucking island before we show up in Tourist Central for a few overpriced cocktails. Clamping a hand on his shoulder, I said, think about it, bro. Where better than Taormina to see and be seen? It's the perfect alibi. We shouldn't need an alibi, This is a bad idea. He glared as if daring me to disagree again. We're going to have to stop for fuel at some point. Shit. The more people who saw us, the more likely word would get back to Pietro Lazio. Make it someplace small. We can't risk anyone recognizing us or the boat. Obviously. He ran his hand over his head. Stupid question, but why aren't you taking her to Comiso and putting her on the company jet? Great minds think alike. She's afraid one of her father's spies will see them getting on the plane, or the plane taking off, or who the hell knows. Bottom line, she doesn't want to put us in more danger. Screw that. We're up to our asses in alligators as it is. Dante changed our heading. We have security in Comiso. I'll call my guys and set up an escort when we get closer. She's going to be pissed. I couldn't help but laugh. He'd given me the best of both worlds, Nico's safety and someone to blame when she found out about the change of plans. Like I give a shit. He fidgeted around like a toddler on the verge of a meltdown. What is she doing down there? Cleaning up. The thought of Nico wet and naked downstairs made my blood rush south. I don't think I've ever seen her without makeup. I barely recognized her. Dante's frown deepened. She looked young and terrified. Nico's my age. Leave it to my baby brother to make me feel like a perv. Here I was, sporting wood over a woman who was running for her life, or, more specifically, running from an arranged marriage to yet another of my brothers. Too fucking young to get hitched. Maybe, maybe not. He gave me a what the hell look. Dude, she literally ran away from her mob boss father to avoid marrying Enzo. Nodding, I glanced away. You still have a thing for her, he barked out a laugh. That's what this is all about? You're hoping you'll ride in on your noble steed, brandish your sword, and save the princess from the evil dragon? Then the two of you will, what, ride off into the sunset together? Not before Frodo gives me the magical ring, I smirked. I don't have a thing for her. She's pretty much been promised to Enzo since she turned 15. I have no desire to screw our brother's future wife. And you have your head up your ass. She obviously isn't interested in honoring that promise now, is she? No, but that doesn't mean I'm here now because I have a thing for her. He turned. You've drooled over Nico since we were kids. It's time someone told you how it is. He was pissing me off in a major way because he was right. I had followed Nico around like a puppy, but that was what made my temporary marriage plan utter genius. I could spend time with her, in and out of bed, and finally get the woman out of my system. How is it? She's just not that into you. I'd heard enough. Brother or not, Dante could kiss my ass if he thought I was going to stand there and let him bust my balls. Shut up and drive. Steer. You drive a car, but you steer a boat. He pulled back on the throttle. The boat lurched forward so abruptly I scrambled to find a handhold. What the hell? Just trying to get the Principessa to Comiso as soon as possible. Don't call her that. Not only was the nickname demeaning, Enzo had used the Italian version of princess to address Nico since we were in grade school. The last thing I wanted was to remind her of her would-be husband. I'll lay off the pet names if you reach around and pull that giant stick out of your ass. I'm not the enemy here. While I hated to admit it, he was right. Dante had risked as much as I had for a lot less potential reward. Sorry, I'm running on Red Bull and espresso. Dante rolled his head from one side to the other as if to relieve the tension in his neck. Speaking of that, I need a couple hours of shut-eye. Like hell, sleep on one of the couches up here. The thought of him below deck with Nico had me clenching my fists again. What the hell is wrong with me? She's a friend, a hot friend, but nothing to get jealous over. Take it easy. The last thing I want is her talking my ear off or crying on my shoulder while I'm trying to sleep. He yawned, shook his head, and rubbed his eyes. The Grassos are in one cabin and Nico's in the other. Let me make sure she's comfortable hanging out in the galley while you sleep. Why wouldn't she be? I'm not going to hit on your crush. Dante must have seen my frustration in my expression because he hitched a shoulder and gave me a half grin. Marco, relax. The windows are tinted. Keep her out of view of the windshield, and she'll be fine up here with you. Do you think you can stay awake long enough for me to talk to her, or do you need your nap and blankie now? He flipped me the finger, adjusted course, and opened up the throttle. I knew Dante meant well, but he didn't understand. Sure, he was right about my childhood crush, but he was wrong about everything else. Nico and I had talked or texted a couple of times a week since high school. I was her confidant, the person who talked her through breakups, her problems at home, her hopes and dreams. It wasn't like I was in love with her. We were friends, but I'd be open to adding benefits. I walked below deck and knocked on her cabin door. Nick? Yes? Her voice came out small and unsure. Dante needs to crash for a couple of hours. Come upstairs and keep me company. He can have the cabin, but I'd rather stay below deck. Resting my hand on the door jamb, I debated my options. I could leave her down here alone, and from the sounds of it, crying, or I could use a little Marchionni creativity to convince her to come out. Nick, sorry to lay this on you, but Dante and I are bone tired. He needs sleep, and I could really use some help upstairs. Boating while sleep-deprived is a crime in the States. The lock turned, and she opened the door a sliver. Slumping my shoulders, I gave her the most pathetic expression I could muster. Please. Her dark eyes narrowed. You were here before my shower and you didn't seem tired? Caffeine crash. I yawned and brought my fist to my mouth. Dante's in even worse shape. Neither of us slept last night. Yes, fine. Nico stepped out of the room and motioned to the red blouse and pair of white capri pants. I didn't need your t-shirt after all. I struggled to hide my grin. She wore my mother's clothes. The problem was Nico stood 5'11", a foot taller than my mom. I would have suggested you search the closet and drawers, but I didn't think anything here would fit. She gave me a playful slap. They don't. I had to tie the shirt and roll up the pants. I took a step back and looked her over from her thick dark hair to her red toenail polish. My gaze hung up on the swath of tan skin between the bottom of the t-shirt and waistband of the pants. I'd seen this woman wearing everything from evening gowns to string bikinis, but that band of peekaboo skin was hands down the sexiest thing ever. Nico folded her arms and turned from me. We should go topside. Licking my lips, I shook my head. Can we talk first?
Chapter 4. Nico. This was Italy. Men stared. Like the fact birds flew, it was a simple rule of nature. However, Marco Marchionni had taken staring to an entirely different level. To make matters worse, my body responded to his traveling gaze as if he'd caressed me everywhere. I crossed my arms to hide my nipples and prayed to the Virgin Mary he hadn't noticed them. We were friends, best friends, and if my father had his way, I'd be his sister-in-law by the end of the week. Looking, even without touching, would end in disaster.
Have a seat, beautiful.
Marco sat on the sofa like a man who owned the world, arms draped across the back and long legs spread out before him. He ate up more real estate than necessary. Despite his easy manner, I had a feeling his posture was by design. I glanced between him and the chairs on the other side of the room.
I'm not going to bite.
He patted the small space beside him. I sat on the sofa and regretted it. The tight confines made it impossible for either of us to move without touching the other. He shifted his entire body toward mine.
Dante made an executive decision. He's taking us to Comiso.
It's too dangerous. Of course, Marco changed the plans without consulting me. I had second and third thoughts about involving him in my escape. If my father got wind he'd helped me, it could lead to violence like Sicily hadn't seen since the early days of the mafia.
I need to know where you want to land in the States for the flight plan, and Maria and Alessio's passport info for the flight manifest.
Okay, but...
No buts. After you drop them, you can take the jet anywhere you need to go. Or I can rent you a car.
They're going to Canton, Ohio, but you've done enough. This is... You had no right to make this decision for me. I was so angry I wanted to smack the goofy grin off his face.
Think about it, Nick. We never would have made it to Pantelleria before your father's goons. We have security in Comiso, and you'll be safe once you're in the air.
He was right, and I knew it, but I didn't like it. Marco, I need to learn to take care of myself. I didn't flee my father to have another man run my life.
That's not what I'm doing here.
He hung his head.
I get it. We both grew up with other people calling the shots for us. I apologize.
Thank you. I curled into the corner of the couch. And no rental cars. You shouldn't put anything in your name.
Who said anything about it being in my name?
Chuckling, he stood, walked to a cabinet, and tossed a passport at me.
It's German?
I opened the cover and laughed.
Frederick Fassbender? Any relation to the actor? If anyone asks, I tell them I'm a distant cousin.
Marco snatched it from me and dropped it into his shirt pocket.
I have a credit card with the same alias tucked in the back.
It makes you sound like a porn star. Do you use that when you pick up women? Like his brothers, Marco Marchionni had a reputation for being quite a player. Unlike his brothers, Marco lived up to said reputation. I'd given up trying to keep track of his countless one-night stands long ago. The man seemed incapable of making a commitment.
Maybe a few times, but not anymore. I'm thinking it's time to grow up, stop sleeping around, settle down.
Since when? Good for you. His expression grew serious.
Do you have enough money to live on?
What about Alessio and Maria? I filled a bag with cash from my father's safe before I left. I'm planning to give most of it to them. Honestly, I had no idea how much I'd need to start a new life, nor did I know how long it would take to drive from Ohio to New Orleans, or how to get there, or how to fill a gas tank. The reality of my situation hit me. What have I done?
Hey.
Marco wrapped his arms around me.
What's wrong? Talk to me.
I was thinking about... For the first time in my life, I couldn't tell him the truth. What would he think if he knew how useless I was in the real world?
Nick, you can tell me anything. You know that.
He motioned to himself.
This is a no-judgment zone.
My mother would be so ashamed of me. I blurted out the first thing that popped in my head. I'd never known my mom, but now that I thought about it, I couldn't imagine she would be proud if she could see what I'd become. He pulled me close and kissed the top of my head.
I'd like to think that you wouldn't be in this situation if she was around. Then again, my mother is pushing Enzo to go through with the wedding, so who knows?
The sadness in his voice was contagious. Rather than allowing either of us to wallow, I decided to lighten the mood. Holding back a smile, I jerked away from him. This is how you comfort me? Insulting my dead mother? Marco's eyes widened.
No, I'm sure Vittoria was a saint.
Gotcha. Laughing, I poked the ticklish spot on his side. I'd discovered it when we were in grade school and had used it to my advantage ever since. He wrapped his arm around my neck and scrubbed his knuckles across my scalp. Ow! Hey, no nookies! Cracking up, Marco released me.
It's noogies.
That is what I said. He shook his head slowly, and that sexy grin of his returned.
You said nookie, which is American for sex.
Minchia, I swore under my breath. Of all the words to misuse. Even my tongue is thinking about Marco's body. He nudged my shoulder.
Seriously, though, what's wrong? And don't tell me you're thinking about your mother. If you're worried about driving 16 hours, take the jet to New Orleans. Or I could come with you.
16 hours? Is he kidding? My mouth went dry. It's better if I go alone. Marco sighed and pulled his phone out. After typing and scrolling silently, he turned the screen toward me.
Look, the jet is scheduled to be in New Orleans in a few days. There's no sense in the pilot bringing it back to Sicily to turn around and fly back. Nor is there any reason for you not to be on it when it lands in Louisiana.
I eyed the calendar.
How do I know you didn't just type that in? You don't. He dropped the phone in his pocket next to the fake passport. Do what you want, but as long as you're on my plane, I can protect you. The thought of my father's men finding me caused my heart to race. No, I can't risk being spotted. I will drive. This is ridiculous. Frustration deepened his voice. I understand you want to be independent, but you're taking unnecessary risks. I'll be fine. I forced a smile. What is that American saying? My lack of emergency is not your plan. Laughing, Marco shook his head. What am I going to do with you? You're going to put me on a plane in Comiso and forget about me. Never going to happen, Piccolina. I couldn't forget you if I wanted to. He winked when he used my childhood nickname. This situation is temporary. In fact, I have a solution that doesn't involve you roaming the globe alone. I had the feeling I wouldn't like his so-called solution. Does it involve you coming with me? Yes and no. Marco cleared his throat. Marry me. I laughed, because what else could I possibly do? Cry? Yes, I could cry that this sweet, beautiful man asked such a thing. You want me to marry you so I won't have to marry your brother? He dipped his chin. I know you're not in love with me or anything close. It wouldn't have to be real. An overwhelming sense of disappointment tightened my throat. Rather than diving into the cause of my sudden emotions, I stuck with the facts. If you mean we wouldn't be married in a church, my father would claim it was illegitimate. We can do it in a church in front of a priest. As far as the world was concerned, we would be man and wife. But we wouldn't be. I swallowed back my unexpected emotions. This is Marco. He doesn't actually want to marry me, or anyone else. Not unless we consummated the marriage. He scrubbed his jaw. We could play house until it's safe to have it annulled. Platonic house. While his plan was flawed, there was a certain logic to it. However, I doubted he fully understood the reason my father had demanded I marry Enzo. Even if Marco understood mob politics, too much could go wrong if we eloped. It's next to impossible to prove a marriage wasn't consummated. Besides, playing platonic house, as you call it, could ruin our friendship. Nothing would do that, Nico. Nothing. I wanted to believe him, but I had my doubts. The second I started acting like a girlfriend, or worse, a wife, he'd regret asking me to marry him. I couldn't do that to either of us. Marco, I'm honored that you would do this for me, but I want to prove to myself and everyone else I can stand on my own. I reached for his hand, but stopped when his phone rang. Marco held the cell between his shoulder and walked to the bar. Gabe, how nice of you to call. I couldn't make out the words, but I could hear a man's voice shouting across the line. This is it? His family knows what we've done. I'll be sent back. He filled 2 glasses with red wine. Dante and I were going a knocking futz in the house. We went fishing. We'll be back late. More shouting, but this time Gabe said my name. Nico's missing. Marco glanced at me. I haven't seen her. Hugging my knees to my chest, I rested my forehead on my arms and prayed. Gabe, calm down. This is Nico we're talking about. She's probably booked herself into a 5-star resort and is getting a massage in a swanky spa while everyone else freaks out. Is this what they think of me? I squeezed my eyes closed to keep from crying. I'd acted like a spoiled brat over the previous few weeks, but it was part of my plan.
I'd thought if I could make Enzo miserable, he would refuse to marry me. It had worked, to a point. He wanted nothing to do with me, but I'd all but ruined my reputation in the process. It was all for nothing. Our parents were more determined than ever to tie me to Enzo. I could go along with Marco's plan. Not even my father could put aside a marriage ordained by the Catholic Church. What am I thinking? Marco would be miserable after a week, or worse, having sex with other women while pretending to be married to me. Ciao. He disconnected the call and rested his hand on my arm. You know I didn't mean any of that. Do I? Without raising my head, I said, Maybe not, but your family believes I'm a lunatic. Actually, you're wrong. Gabe knows you were putting on a show to push Enzo away. Then why did you say those things? To convince him I didn't know where you were. Marco lifted my chin and stared into my eyes. Marry me, Nick. We've known each other our entire lives. I'd never hurt you. Something in the way he asked the question touched me. He seemed so earnest, as if he really wanted to share his life with me. I could think of far worse things than waking up next to my sexy friend for the rest of my days. But this wasn't real. Marco was being Marco. He was only trying to save me. I can't. He nodded once, went back to the bar, and returned with the wine. Then have a drink with me while we look over the best routes from Canton to New Orleans. I'm sorry. I wanted to explain, to tell him the real reason my father and his mother wanted the union. Not to mention, I wasn't wife material. I'd never once made a meal or washed my own clothes or been with a man. Hey, he set the glasses aside. You have nothing to apologize for. I meant what I said. Nothing is going to ruin our friendship. Not even you shooting down my awesomely romantic proposal. I laughed through the pain in my chest. If you think that was romantic, I understand why you never have a second date with a woman. I never have a second date because I haven't found anyone I liked enough to bother. Marco gave me a sad smile. We should head upstairs so Dante can get some sleep.
Chapter 5. Marco. Someone should write a country song about watching a jet take the woman who turned down your fake marriage proposal far away. Letting Nico go was the hardest thing I'd ever done. Like a lovesick fool, I'd stood on the tarmac until the plane disappeared into the night sky. I slid into the back seat of the waiting SUV and slammed the door. Let's get the hell out of here. Not yet. Dante ran his hand over the back of his neck. Is she going to be okay? I pulled out as much cash as I could from the ATM and gave her every euro I had on me. I didn't want to talk about Nico. In fact, I didn't want to talk about a damn thing. She's really going to take a rental car from Ohio to New Orleans? He frowned. Without security? That's her grand plan. I stared out the window. I'm surprised she knows how to drive, let alone fill the tank, or use a map. He folded his arms and stared as if waiting for me to reassure him. Not for nothing, Dante, but you're the son of a bitch that hasn't stopped complaining since we left home last night. It's a little late for you to give a shit about her. I motioned for the driver to go. The sooner we got the hell out of there, the better. We're not leaving yet, Dante said to the driver before turning back to me. Just because I didn't want to get caught in the crossfire doesn't mean I don't care about Nicolina. Let's face it, she's lived a pretty sheltered life. She'll be fine. If she runs into trouble, she has a burner phone and my number. I hated the thought of her driving so many miles alone, but she'd made it clear she didn't want me along for the ride, or anything else. Dante signaled for the driver to go. Get some shut-eye. You'll need it. Gabe's going to chew our asses when we get home. I'll wake you when we're close. I rested my head back and folded my arms. For once in his life, my little brother was right. Nico had grown up in a golden castle. However, she was stronger than anyone gave her credit for. I should respect her wishes. She can handle herself. But damn it all, she shouldn't be alone. Sooner or later, Pietro Lazio will find her. I know that look. You're either planning something or constipated. He nodded toward the terminal. If you're going, you need to hurry. The morning flight to Rome leaves in a half hour. I raked my hands through my hair. I hate it, but she seemed determined to do this on her own. So, go home and visit Enzo. Worst case scenario, you're in the States if she needs help. Best case, you happen to be in New Orleans the same time she is. Since when are you the wise brother? I chuckled and checked my pocket for my fake passport and credit card. Motioning to the driver, I said, "Circle back to the terminal." Dante laughed. "I'll deny I said this, but you're making the right decision." "What are you going to tell Gabe?" "That you went home to talk to Enzo?" He shrugged. "The jet's missing. He's going to know something's up and assume Nico's involved." While I appreciated my little brother's level of subterfuge, I didn't feel right about all of the lies. Gabe might have told me to steer clear of Nico, but he'd understand. Eventually. I'll call him after I get my ticket and give him the short version of the situation. Dante gave me a quick hug and pat on the back. "Have fun flying commercial, bro." My heart beat out a rhythm better suited for a Metallica song than an internal organ. I had no freaking clue how I'd find Nico in New Orleans. But figure it out. All I had to do was keep my eye on the prize. The rest would work itself out. Or, so I told myself. Ticket in hand, I made it to the gate with 10 minutes to spare. Because I was a man of my word, I dialed Gabe's number. My brother Leo picked up instead. "Marco, where the hell are you?" Leo was 10 months younger than Gabe, and normally the more rational of the two. However, the current situation was anything but normal. I didn't have time to launch into a 10-minute explanation. I needed to give him a quick update and get on the plane. "Did I call the wrong number, or are you babysitting Gabe's phone?" "He's busy handling the mess you made." Leo did not sound amused. Pinching the bridge of my nose, I said, "How bad is it?" "The short version? Pietro Lazio knows you and Dante were in Levanzo this morning." A muffled sound came over the line, as if he'd covered the receiver. "Could you focus on one conversation? I'm in a bit of a hurry." He sighed. "What were you thinking? You know we're sitting on a powder keg with the Lazios. You could have given someone a heads up before you lit the fucking match." "Shit. She was in trouble. Where is she now?" He sighed. Like me, Leo had a soft spot for a woman in need. Unlike me, he didn't extend his need-relieving services to the bedroom. As far as I knew, he lived like a monk. Safe and on our way out of the country. I held my breath, waiting for him to launch into a lecture. "Good." He lowered his voice. "Where are you and Dante?" "He's on his way back to the compound." "He? Where the hell are you?" "Hang on." Leo spoke to someone else in the room. "Send security to the port. Dante's coming from the airport and has his own guys." My brother growled under his breath. "Never mind." The gate attendant announced the final boarding call. "I hate to leave you to clean up my mess, but I'm catching a flight to Rome and then to New Orleans. Someone should go make sure Shauna doesn't murder Enzo and feed his body to the gators." "Is Nico heading to—" "You know what? Don't fucking tell me. Stay at the mansion. Don't leave without security. Things are as hot there as they are here." He drew a breath and exhaled very slowly. "Just be careful. Call me when you land." "Will do." By some miracle, I slept the entire flight to Rome. I consider this a sign of divine intervention rather than outright exhaustion for 2 reasons. 1, I never slept on planes. I hated flying almost as much as I hated reptiles and insects. 2, the only empty seat was between a married couple. A married couple in the midst of an argument. I'd offered to change seats with one of them so they could sit beside each other, but they'd both refused. Instead, they hurled insults around me. It was almost enough to make me rethink proposing to Nico. Almost. It's not like Nico and I will have a real marriage. We'd have it annulled before we got to the bickering stage. Since I had no clue when it'd be safe to go to my condo, I spent my 4-hour layover shopping for a roller bag, a couple changes of clothes, and a toothbrush. On the way to the gate, I had an idea. I wandered into the jewelry store like a kid walking into Santa's workshop, excited and completely overwhelmed and scared shitless. A blonde with thick glasses and an expression that looked like she just sucked a lemon frowned at me. "May I help you?" "Engagement rings?" My voice cracked. I cleared my throat and tried again. "I'm looking for an engagement ring." "They are over here." Her smile warmed enough that she no longer reminded me of my third-grade teacher, Sister Agnes. I followed her to a glass case in the back of the store, where she pulled out a tray of simple rings with stones on the minuscule side of small. This is ridiculous. Who buys an engagement ring in the airport? Do you have a budget, sir? The saleswoman put the tray away. No. I made my way to the next case and studied each ring. Oh, those are, well, they are very expensive. Her sour expression returned. It hadn't occurred to me that I looked like a college student coming off a weekend bender, but it shouldn't have mattered. In fact, it irritated me that she'd treated me like the hooker in Pretty Woman. Not that I'd watched the movie of my own free will. Nico had forced me to endure it. I motioned to the other saleswoman. Excuse me, can I borrow you for a moment? The young lady gave me a once-over, but unlike her co-worker, her lips curled into a flirty smile. Yes? I pointed to a Bucciolati number with an emerald-cut center stone and ornate band with several square diamonds. I'd like to see that one. Lovely choice. She placed it in my hand. The blonde sneered. I turned the ring from side to side, smiling at the way the light caught not only the stones, but the etching along the edges of the platinum band. Long ago, Nico had showed me her mother's wedding ring. She'd gone on and on about the rectangle diamond and the way it glittered and gleamed. This is the one. Just because it's a fake marriage doesn't mean she shouldn't have the ring of her dreams. I'll take it. The young woman bit her lower lip. How would you like to pay for this, sir? Rather than using the very real card with a very fake name, I pulled out my wallet and handed her my American Express black. The blonde, who'd treated me like something she found on the bottom of her shoe, went pale. My new favorite salesperson flashed me a bright smile. Thank you, Mr. Marchionni. Congratulations. Whoever this is for is a very lucky woman. Now, all I have to do is convince her to go along with my plan.
Chapter 6. Nicolina. Crossing the Atlantic in a private jet was no big deal for me. I'd done it my entire life. However, watching Alessio and Maria's reactions to flying for the first time made the entire experience special. I loved that I could give them a new life, a better life. Come, my darling, see how the rising sun looks from the air. Alessio's grin broadened as he slung his arm around his wife and peered out the window. Maria gasped, Bellissimo! Their affection for each other warmed me, but it also left me wanting. I could only imagine what it would be like to spend decades with the same man, to live together so long that I knew the meaning of each of his smiles, to have someone understand me so deeply that explanations weren't necessary. Images of Marco filled my mind. This was the first time I'd left him knowing I might never see him again, or at least not see him for a long time. The thought made me tear up. Maria sat beside me and patted my hand. What troubles you? I was thinking about everything I left behind. I dried my eyes and forced a smile. She motioned between herself and her husband. You are looking at it all wrong. Look to the future, Nico. Think of the new life you will make for yourself. Have faith in your decisions. As always, you are right. Maria tilted her head. There are some things from your old life you are bringing with you. Your work, me, and Alessio. My modeling career is over. So you'll design clothes. It is your real passion. She grinned. Do it under a false name. Dipping my chin, I said, It's not safe for you if I stay. That may be true for us, but Marco? She shook her head. He is young and strong and without fear. Why not go to him? His family will protect you. I'd asked myself the same question 1,000,000 times since I'd left him on the tarmac. I don't want another mafia family to protect me. Her eyes widened. You never say that word out loud. And the Marchionnis are good. Look at all the things they do for the people of Comiso. They are not like the others.
By others, I assumed she meant my family. I had my problems with them, and yes, they did bad things, but they were still my family. Sighing, I shook my head. It doesn't matter if the Pope canonizes every Marchionni who ever existed. I have to do this alone. I want to prove I can stand on my own 2 feet.
To who? Your father?
She made the sign of the cross.
Some people will never see you for who you are. They will only see what they want you to be.
Isn't that the truth? I've never been on my own. Even in Paris, I had bodyguards and assistants.
Nicolina, sometimes the true sign of independence is knowing when to ask for help and having the grace to accept it when it's offered.
Maria nodded toward her husband.
This life isn't meant to be lived alone. You've loved Marco since you were children. You are 2 halves of the same soul.
2 halves of the same soul? I couldn't help but grin. She'd been watching too many Italian soap operas. I adored Marco, but he wasn't the one for me. He's a good friend, but he likes the ladies too much to settle down. She rolled her eyes.
That is true of every man until the right woman grabs them by the ear and tells them how it's going to be.
Laughing, I asked, "Is that what you did with Alessio?" Maria pursed her lips.
Alessio would have lived with his mother until he was too old to marry if I hadn't come along.
I heard that. He turned toward us. Maria is right, but she is also wrong. Sharing a life with someone doesn't make you dependent. It makes you partners. As for Marco Marchionni, he's not good enough for you. No man is. I rolled my eyes. If you had your way, I'd be locked up in a convent for the rest of my life. Maria turned her head, but not before I noticed she'd gone pale. That's not true. He gave me a bashful grin. They stopped allowing families to send their rebellious women to convents many years ago. Maria muttered a prayer under her breath.
Thank goodness for small miracles.
Confused by Maria's reaction, I asked, "Are you all right?" She waved her hand. Thankfully, I didn't have long to contemplate her weird mood or their advice on my love life. The pilot announced we were making our final descent into Canton. Maria and Alessio took their seats and buckled in. Once again, they held hands, pointed out the window like a couple of teenagers. The cockpit door opened and a man dressed in a pilot's uniform approached me. "Miss Marchionni, I need a word with you in private." For a split second, I wondered who he was speaking to. Then I remembered Marco mentioning something about filing flight plans and passenger information. He must have given the pilot false information, but it would have been nice of him to tell me these things before I'd left the ground. Of course. I stood and followed the pilot into the cabin at the rear of the plane. "I have word that customs agents are meeting the plane on the tarmac." His expression grew grim. "Given the circumstances, it's best if you remain back here until we can get you off the aircraft unseen." Circumstances? What in the devil had Marco told him? "Thank you. Are we too close to landing for me to make a call?" "Use the satellite phone, but please, make sure you stay out of sight once we touch down." His tone sent a shiver down my spine. "I will." I hurried back to the main cabin and dialed Marco. He picked up on the 4th ring. "Marchionni." "It's me, Miss Marchionni." The co-pilot told me customs agents are meeting the plane. The background noise made it next to impossible to hear him. "Relax, babe. It's hit or miss when flying. Small airport. I gave him my cousin's name. He already had her passport. Follow his instructions." "Are flight manifests easy to access?" I pressed my hand to my chest as if the pressure would slow my heart. "Easy? No. Depends on Not taking any chances. Please. New Orleans. I trust. Flight crew.
Frustrated, I spoke louder than probably necessary. What? I can barely hear you. Where are you?
Airport. Flight. New Orleans.
You're on your way to Louisiana? I caught myself smiling and forced a frown. No matter how much I loved the idea he'd followed me, I'd specifically told him not to.
Yes. With Enzo. Mansion.
Marco sounded as exasperated as I felt.
Stay with security. Safe.
Miss, I need you to take your seat. The flight attendant motioned to an empty chair near the back of the main cabin. I'll call after I land. After disconnecting the call, I sat and pulled the window shade down. Between the pilot's request that I hide and the bad phone connection, I felt as if I were coming out of my skin. Okay, think. We are flying into a fairly small executive airport, not far from Cleveland. How many international flights do they receive? Do they have customs agents on staff to meet planes? Or did my father get his hands on the flight plan and passenger list? Is everything all right? Maria asked. I won't be able to get off the plane with you. I worked to keep my fear out of my voice. Remember your cover story? We are visiting my sister for 1 month. She is ill, so we don't have a return ticket. We'd gone over their alibi several times, but I needed to be sure they would be safe. I nodded to Maria. And? You arranged for our trip last week, but we have not seen or heard from you since. Frowning, Alessio asked, When will we see you again? I'm not sure, but you have my number. Call if there is any trouble. Glancing away, I rubbed my palms on the white capri pants. I can't do this. This isn't how I want to say goodbye to them. Go to Marco. He will keep you safe. Maria spoke in an authoritative tone I hadn't heard from her since she'd caught me sneaking out when I was 15. I replayed their advice about relationships and independence as the plane touched down and taxied toward the terminal. I wanted to go to Marco, but I was terrified of putting him in more danger. Alessio sucked in a breath and pushed his body back in his chair. Giancarlo is outside. My hand flew to my throat. No, please, no. I didn't really know him, but Giancarlo, the eldest of my 5 brothers, had a reputation as brutal as my father's. Are you sure? It is him. He has 4 men with him. Maria's voice quivered. The flight attendant hurried to my side. You must hide. I had no idea how much she knew about the situation, nor did I care. My one concern was that Alessio and Maria were safe. My gaze fell on the quilted Chanel duffel I'd filled with my father's money. Mother Mary, help us. Quickly, we need another bag. My brother will know that one is mine. I have one you can use. She opened a closet, pulled out a plain black suitcase, and dumped clothing and toiletries onto the couch. Alessio moved the cash into the roller bag. Go, Nico. We will be okay. Go. I turned to the pretty red-headed attendant. Please be sure they make it to their family. I will see to it the Marchionnis reward you for your trouble. Of course. Now come. She ushered me into the master suite, moved a chair to the side, and lifted a hatch in the floor. I stared down into the dark space. What is this? Her smile made her eyes twinkle. You are not the first contraband cargo the Marchionnis have brought from Sicily. Hurry, please. You'll be safe here, but I must go open the cabin door. Voices carried from the front of the plane and had me scrambling into the secret compartment. I'd barely made it inside before she closed the hatch. A thud above my head told me she'd moved the chair back into place. Resting my back against the cold metal, I mentally prayed the rosary, without the beads.
Where is Nicolina?
Giancarlo's unmistakable voice seemed to pull all the oxygen from my hiding place.
We have not seen her since she helped us arrange our trip to visit my sister Rosa.
Maria spoke a little too loud and much too fast.
She is very sick. She could die any minute.
Please, God, let him believe she's telling the truth.
When was this? A week ago,
Alessio said.
What is this about? Has something happened to Nico?
Giancarlo muttered something I couldn't make out before shouting,
Search the plane!
I held my breath as heavy footsteps echoed above me. Doors opened and closed, furniture shifted, and the person or persons knocked along the floor and walls. The men stomped directly over my head. I pressed my hands to my mouth and closed my eyes. Please, please, please go away. A man muttered something that I couldn't make out, and the knocking grew louder. Someone walked back toward the main cabin, and 2 sets of footsteps returned.
Where is it?
It sounded as if Giancarlo stood directly above me. I trembled hard enough to rattle the metal walls. Choking back a sob, I worried I'd give myself away. My brother shouted,
Open it!
The flight attendant said, It's an access door to the electronics panel and an emergency escape hatch. Shuffling, a thud, and a woman's cry of pain echoed around me.
I didn't ask what it was. I said to open it!
I can't let them hurt her. But if Giancarlo finds out Maria and Alessio lied to him, if he finds me, he'll kill them all. Paralyzed with fear, I didn't dare move. Above me and to the left, another hatch opened.
Chapter 7. Marco. The late afternoon sun cast a glare on the polished white marble floors and white leather sofas and crystal vases, with what else but white lilies. Crossing the room in my filthy Converse felt like a sin against nature, only there was absolutely nothing natural about the antiseptic-like mansion. Home sweet home. Not. I hadn't thought of my parents' place in the Garden District as home since I'd left for college. Actually, it had always felt more like a museum than a place people live their lives. Hello? My voice echoed through the cavernous foyer. No answer. The paranoid side of me reared its ugly head. My folks had a small staff led by mine and my brother's former nanny. As far as I knew, Hildy hadn't taken a day off in the last 30-some-odd years. Someone should be here. Hell, Enzo and Shauna should be here. Hello? Anyone home? Hildy? Enzo? Again, no one answered. Dragging my new roller bag behind me, I walked farther into the house. 2 dirty glasses sat on the kitchen counter, along with 2 plates. The signs of life gave me hope. I checked the pool and deck. Empty. The den, also empty. Where the hell is everyone? My phone buzzed in my pocket. I hit answer and pressed it to my ear. Marchionni. Sir, this is Sanford. We are held up in Canton, but should be cleared for takeoff soon. Sanford, a.k.a. my father's pilot, had worked for our family for as long as I could remember. He'd put up with our demanding schedule, spur-of-the-moment vacations, and less-than-legal activities for 20 years. Never in all that time had I heard him sound so unnerved. Nico. My chest tightened. What happened? Giancarlo Lazio and 4 of his men searched the plane. He drew a breath. We were able to hide Nicolina. She's shaken up, but safe. Thank Christ. Tell me she's not still planning to drive to Louisiana. She's asked to accompany us to New Orleans. Good. I rested my hip against the counter. Knowing Nico was in good hands took a weight off my shoulders. And the elderly couple? That's part of the holdup. Nicolina insisted we wait to take off until she gets word they made it to their destination. The mental image of Nico bossing around the flight crew made me smile. I see. Is there anything else I should know before I speak to her? No, sir. Sanford chuckled. She's a brave one. The flight attendant hid her in the special cargo hold. She was down there nearly 2 hours and didn't make a sound. 2 hours? 2 freaking hours! I would have lost it after 5 minutes if someone shoved me inside a metal box. Are you certain the Lazios are gone? Yes, but we're keeping her in the master suite until after we're off the ground as a precaution. He lowered his voice. Mr. Marchionni, this is none of my business, but does your father or Gabrielle know about any of this? Gabe knows, but I'm counting on your discretion not to mention it to my father. I trusted the pilot with my life. He kept more than a few of my secrets over the years, but smuggling a mafia princess into the United States was a little different than not telling my parents about my VIP membership in the Mile High Club. Of course, sir, he cleared his throat. I will personally keep her safe until we land in New Orleans. Thank you. I'd like to speak to her. I hung my head and waited for Nico to come on the line. Marco? Her voice cracked. Did Sanford tell you what happened? I felt every freaking mile of the distance between us. I never should have let her leave, call me so alone. I should have been there. Yes. How are you holding up? I was so scared, she sighed. You were right before. It is too dangerous for me to be on my own. Would you mind if I insist you come. I will have security waiting for you at the airport. And Enzo? He will not be happy to see me. Leave my brother to me. I catch him up on the latest events. If he had a problem with her being here, he could kiss my ass. We're taking off soon. I should go. I conjured every ounce of courage I had in me to tell her everything would be all right and that I'd protect her with my life. Instead, I said, see you soon. Ciao. She disconnected the call. See you soon? That's the best you got. Shaking my head, I grabbed my bag and headed upstairs. A pair of jeans laid across Enzo's unmade bed, but my brother was nowhere to be found. Stranger still, my childhood bedroom door was closed. I reached for the knob, but stopped when I heard voices and moans coming from inside. Is that SOB having sex in my bed? I pounded on the door with the palm of my hand. I don't want to be disturbed, Enzo said. Oh, hell no. I've been traveling too long to put up with this crap. I took a page out of his playbook and threw the door open. Tough shit. Why are you sleeping in here? My brain stuttered. Sure, I'd suspected he was doing the nasty in my bed, but thinking and seeing were two different things. Whoa. Shauna let out a squeak and scrambled off my brother. Good plan, except she took the sheets with her, which left him exposed. I needed bleach for my freaking eyes. Covering my face with my arm, I said, Dude, get dressed before you put someone's eye out. Leave. Enzo pointed toward the door with more than his hand. The entire situation had me cracking up. He'd caught me in the act more times than I could count. Now that the tables were turned, I took great pleasure in tormenting him. You don't have to be rude about it. You're the one playing hide the sausage in my bed. Go, while you still have functioning kneecaps. He strode to the door and shoved me into the hall. Big threats for someone with his cock hanging out. Laughing, I walked back downstairs. I hadn't seen food since Rome, and all the excitement made me hungry. I poked my head in the fridge and hit the jackpot. Hildy's gumbo. I figured she'd made it for Enzo. He'd always been her favorite. What better way to get under his skin than to eat his special soup after seeing his girlfriend's tits? Normally, I'd reheat it on the stove to keep the shellfish from turning to rubber, but I didn't dare take the time. Instead, I nuked it. She made that for me, you know. Enzo stood in the doorway with his arms folded. I figured, but I didn't think you'd be down in time to catch me. I wiggled my brows. Gabe didn't mention you were coming home today. He pulled a couple of steaks from the fridge. I hitched a shoulder and took a huge bite of gumbo. He has a lot on his mind. Enzo gave me an odd look before getting 3 potatoes from the pantry and walking into the sink. What was so important in New Orleans you'd risk leaving the compound? I needed to talk to him about Nico before she showed up on the doorstep, but he didn't seem to be in a very receptive mood. Instead, I decided to keep the focus on him, specifically his epic screw-up. You, bro. I came home to talk to you. He paused mid-scrub and pointed the potato at me. Now I know you're full of shit. Is it that hard to believe I love you enough to cross an ocean to stop you from ruining your life? I bit back a laugh. While I'd walk through fire for him, Enzo had made a career out of believing himself the black sheep of the family. Yeah, it is. How is it I'm ruining my life? I glanced over my shoulder to make sure we were alone. This thing with the Lazios isn't going away. Which thing? They aren't going to let up until there's a wedding. They will if Gabe agrees to business as usual. I couldn't believe his arrogance. Is he really suggesting we stay in the mob? You and I both know that isn't going to happen. He turned with a paring knife in his hand. Then someone needs to convince Nico that marrying me is a horrible idea. While I knew Nico had zero intentions of marrying the asshole, I couldn't resist the opportunity to bust his balls. We could do a press release detailing your erectile dysfunction and chronic STDs. Ha ha. I met his gaze and dropped the clown act. Nico doesn't want this any more than you do. Enzo's eyes widened. How do you know that? We've talked about it. Smirking, he shook his head. Did she tell you she all but demanded I propose to her? Yes, she had her reasons, but it's not my place to tell you what they were. She can do it herself when she gets here. That's convenient. He turned back to the food. While I understood Nico had behaved like a stark raving lunatic, his attitude was starting to piss me off. She's a victim in this scenario, too. I appreciate you coming to tell me this, but you don't know what the hell you're talking about. Enzo had always had an air of superiority about him, but when he walked to me and clamped his wet hands on my shoulders, I wanted to throat punch him. Oh yeah, asshole? Let's see who knows what. I know you left the exterior security cameras on last night. I called the office and had them turned off when I came home, but... The color drained from his face. Who saw the footage? Pops, for one. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Ma had an epic meltdown, so I assumed she heard about it, if not witnessed it for herself. Christ. I grabbed a chair, turned it backward, and straddled it. A habit I knew he hated. How could you forget to turn them off? The feed goes live to Marchionni Corp security. Anyone with a password can log in and check it out. Do me a favor. Don't mention this to Shauna. I should be the one to... Don't mention what to me? The woman in question glanced between us. If looks could kill, we'd be bleeding out on the kitchen. Chapter 8. Marco. After dropping the bomb about Enzo and Shauna's skin flick going live at Marchionni Corp, I went upstairs and took a shower. If my calculations were correct, Nico would arrive in about 2 hours. I needed to give Enzo a heads up, but there was no reasoning with him when he was upset. And let me tell you, he was upset. But that's not all. I mused over the goofy expression that overcame him when he gazed at Shauna. I never would have thought it possible, but Enzo was in love. I might have had a slight obsession with saving Nico, but I'd never been so gaga over a woman. Nor did I plan to be anytime soon. Dreading the upcoming conversation, I grabbed a beer from the fridge and headed out to the pool deck. Enzo didn't appear to have heard me open the sliding glass door. He just stood there, staring off into space like a freaking statue while our dinner slowly turned to coal. How are the steaks coming? I pointed to the smoke pouring out of the grill. Smells like they're burning. Son of a bitch. He threw the lid open and tossed the meat onto a plate. People burn food all the time, but Enzo wasn't your average backyard cook. He ran one of the hottest restaurants in New Orleans. My brother could make a feast out of garbage, if he had the right spices. I needed to know where he stood with Shauna before I told him about Nico. If he was in denial about his feelings, it would complicate things, and I'll have to kick him in the ass to get him moving. I'd ask where your head is, but it's obvious. He ignored me. Come on, Enzo. A blind man could see you're in love with her. I nudged his shoulder. What are you going to do about it? Enjoy it while it lasts, and let her go when it ends. Is he for real, or is he talking a big game? That's cold, even for you. What about her? Have you thought about her feelings? Glaring, he opened his mouth as if to speak, but shouting erupted in the front of the house. My heart stopped beating. Nico had arrived early. Not only would Enzo throttle me for not telling him she was coming, Nico would have my balls in a jar for putting her in a situation where she'd have to defend herself. She'd been through enough in the previous 24 hours. She didn't need Enzo's shit on top of it. Oh, crap. I made a break for the house, tripped over a lounge chair, and went down hard. Pain shot from my calf to my shoulder and back again, but all I could think about was Nico and Shauna coming to blows. Get in there before one of them bleeds on Ma's white rugs. Enzo's nostrils flared. What the hell is Nico doing here? Go! I glanced down and my stomach turned. Blood covered the lower half of my right leg. I'd never been one to handle gore well, especially if said gore belonged to me. The shouting in the front of the house continued, but Enzo's voice added to the mix. From the sounds of it, he'd made it worse. I couldn't let him or Shauna give Nico a hard time, not when they didn't know the whole story. Ignoring the blood trailing behind me, I hobbled toward the door. Shauna rounded the corner wearing an expression that promised pain, major pain. However, when she glanced down at my calf, her face softened. "My God, what did you do? Are you okay?" Hildy came up behind her with a first aid kit. Unlike Shauna, the older woman wasted no time asking questions. She'd practically raised me and my brothers. This wasn't the first time one of us had sliced ourselves open while running on the deck. "Sit, let me look at it." I sank into a lounge chair and propped up my wounded leg. Hildy eased the towel back, sucked a breath between her teeth, and turned to Shauna. "Go inside and get a bowl of water and a couple of dish towels." She nodded and headed for the kitchen. Hildy met my gaze. "Why is Nico here?" "If it's all the same to you, I'd rather explain when Shauna returns." "That's fine, but you and I are going to have a long talk. Alone." Shauna returned and set the bowl on the end of the lounger. "You don't seem surprised to see Nico." "I'm not." Wincing from whatever the hell Hildy was doing to my cut, I said, "She's on the run from her father. I helped her escape Trapani." Both women stared slack-jawed. I ran my hands over my head and turned to Shauna. "First off, you need to know that Nico has zero interest in Enzo. My mother and her father have been pushing them together for years." She huffed out a humorless laugh. "You don't believe me?" I arched a brow. Considering the way she was acting before Gabe's wedding, no. She was trying to alienate Enzo. Nodding toward the front of the house, I asked, "Think about it. Does she seem like the kind of woman who has to chase men down and force them to be with her?" "No, I guess not," Shauna sighed. Hildy poured what felt like pure alcohol onto the wound. I bit back a few choice words and focused on Shauna. "Nico snuck out of her father's mansion with people shooting over her head. Dante and I spent 8 hours in the yacht with the throttle wide open to get to her. When she got to the States, she had to hide in a cargo hold for hours while her brother had armed men search our company jet. She's in trouble, and I offered to help. If you or my brother have a problem with her being here, you can suck it up." She sank into the chair beside me. "My God, no wonder she looks so different. So scared. I'll talk to Enzo and get him to lay off." "Thank you." Hildy narrowed her eyes. "Do your parents know any of this?" I shook my head. "Gabe and Leo are in the loop, but I doubt they'd say anything to them." "They won't hear it from me." She pressed a bandage over my wound. "You should go to the hospital for stitches." "I'm not leaving Nico's side, not until things calm down." She pursed her lips. "I figured as much. I'll dress it with Steri-strips." "Thank you." Shauna tilted her head. "I didn't realize you two were close." Doctoring me up, Hildy said, "They were practically raised together when they were babies. After the Marchionnis moved to the States, Marco and Nico spent their summers and holidays together." I took Shauna's hand. "I know it's a lot to ask, but please, be nice to Nico. She's been through a lot." "Of course." She stood and rubbed her hands on her thighs. "I should go check on her. Enzo seemed pretty determined to send her away." Hildy waited until she'd gone before turning to me. The concern in her kind eyes broke my heart. "I don't pretend to know what went on in Sicily between Nico and Enzo, but I do know your mother is planning their wedding." "Ma can plan all she wants. It's not going to happen." I was tempted to show her the ring in my pocket, but I didn't want to give her the wrong impression. She gave me a dubious look. "Are you sure about that?" "Enzo seems to be getting serious with Shauna, and Nico doesn't want the marriage either. Not even my mother can force two people to get married. It would never stand in the eyes of the church." She tilted her head. "This doesn't have anything to do with the way you feel about Nico." My stomach did a backflip. What the hell is that about? Nico and I are friends, but I'd do anything for her, even if that means marrying her to save her from being stuck with Enzo for the rest of her life. Hildy gave me a patient smile. "She's a lucky woman to have such a good friend." "I'm the lucky one." Oddly enough, I meant it. Besides my whacked-out family, Nico was the one constant in my life. "You know I disagree with the way your mother involves herself in you boys' personal lives, but she ain't about to change any time soon." Hildy dipped her chin. "If you keep helping Nico, you're going to have a fight on your hands, and it won't be just your mama. Your father and Pietro Lazio aren't going to sit idly by. Are you ready for that? I wrapped my arms around her frail shoulders and kissed her puffy white hair. I'll gladly take them all on to keep her safe. Pulling away, she wiped her eyes. I can't believe how fast you boys have grown up. It seems like yesterday you and Dante were running around in diapers, getting into trouble. Hey, now, no stories about what a handful I was. You'll ruin my reputation as the good one of the bunch. She smiled. I should go see about saving dinner. Thanks for understanding. You might be the only one who does. I settled back against the chair and closed my eyes. My leg had gone from searing pain to a dull ache. Plus, the events of the previous couple of days were catching up with me. 5 minutes of shut-eye would help take the edge off. No such luck. Enzo walked outside, wide-eyed, pale-faced, and running his hands over his head like a man on the verge of a nervous breakdown. It would have been nice to have a little warning that you invited Nico to stay here. I planned to, but we started talking about the security footage. Then Shauna showed up. And after that, rather than try to bullshit him, I told the God's honest truth. I wussed out, and she showed up early. Where are the women? Enzo narrowed his eyes. Shauna took Nico upstairs to find some clean clothes. Why is she here? I told him the entire story, except for my plan and the ring in my pocket. The last place anyone will look for her is with the person she's being forced to marry. Enzo asked the same question Shauna had about Nico's behavior in Sicily. I'd answered them so many times, I spoke on autopilot. He seemed to take it all in. And you're sure the Lazios don't know she's here? They tore the plane apart and didn't find her. He nodded and frowned again. Maria and Alessio are safe. They're in Canton with Maria's sister. Nico set them up with a fat nest egg. That was good of her. Believe it or not, she has a big heart. Movement in the corner of my eye drew my attention. I turned and took in the most stunning sight I'd ever seen. Nico stood in the kitchen wearing a pair of shorts and tank top. She pulled her long dark hair into a high ponytail that showed off the long, graceful curve of her neck. Without a speck of makeup, primping, or designer clothes, she stole my breath. Enzo sighed. If I didn't know it was her, I wouldn't recognize her. That's because you don't know her. Not like I do.
Chapter 9. Nicolina. I knew a little something about hostile situations. I was the youngest of 6 children and only girl. I'd grown up in the mafia. I'd participated in Milan Fashion Week as a model and fledgling designer. However, none of that prepared me for walking into the Marchionni mansion. The only reason I didn't leave, my one saving grace, was Marco. The way he smiled when I walked out onto the pool deck sent my heart racing. He stood and pulled me into a tight embrace. There you are. Fighting back tears, I nuzzled my face into his chest. How are you holding up? Marco released me and motioned to the chair beside him. Confused? Understatement of the century. I sat and leaned close enough to speak to him without Enzo and Shauna overhearing. They believe my family is responsible for the problems at the wedding and the arson at Shauna's apartment and Enzo's restaurant. He pressed his lips into a tight line. Right, but just because you have the same last name doesn't mean you were involved. My throat tightened. He thinks my father did these things? You agree with them? You think my father is a liar? I don't know what to think, but the circumstantial evidence is pretty damning. What does that mean? Circumstantial evidence? I'd learned English, French, and Portuguese in Italy. While I could hold my own with native speakers, I'd never lost my accent, and I struggled with some phrases and idioms. He answered my question in Italian. It means there is no real proof, but the circumstances seem to indicate the guilty party. What circumstances? The problems started around the same time your father demanded the engagement to my brother. Yes, but my father has repeatedly denied any involvement. I glanced toward the other couple to make sure they weren't eavesdropping. I asked him outright. He would not lie to my face. There is lying, and there is bending the truth. I am not stupid. I understand the difference. I didn't say you were stupid, Nick.
You're one of the smartest people I know. You may have never set foot in a traditional school, but those tutors your dad hired were legit.
If by legit you mean demanding assholes, you are right. Most people never looked past my face or my modeling career. They assumed my only skills were walking in stilettos and smiling for the camera. Not Marco. He'd always seen the real me. He trailed his fingertips down my arm.
It's been a long day. Let's agree that neither of us know who is responsible for the violence and leave it at that, okay?
Okay. I didn't want to drop it. In my eyes, my father had one redeeming quality. He spoke the truth. Sure, the truth wasn't always easy to hear, and it sometimes hurt people, but it was the only part of him I could look up to. Marco lowered his voice.
How would you feel about staying someplace else? Just the two of us?
Yes, please. Take me anywhere Enzo isn't. Where would we go?
Wherever we want.
He flashed me his thinking dirty thoughts grin.
Somewhere warm, sandy, and romantic.
While I loved the idea of putting distance between myself and Enzo, leaving the mansion came with its own set of problems. We wouldn't be alone. We'd need security. Plus, we'd have to pay for a hotel. I can't use my credit cards. He hitched a shoulder.
I'll use mine.
He doesn't understand. My father already suspects you helped me escape. Everything we do will leave a paper trail. How long will it take before he convinces your mother to check your finances?
There's cash in the safe upstairs. He took my hand. Where there's a will, there's a way, Nick. The question is, do you want to live in paradise with me?
It's not that simple. There are things you don't understand. I couldn't decide if he was naive or reckless. Not that either option boded well for our safety. Marco sighed.
Then explain them to me.
I glanced over my shoulder at Shauna and Enzo. I can't. Not here. He pushed himself upright and eased his injured leg off the chair.
You must be starving. Let's get some dinner.
I ate on the plane, and my stomach is in knots. It seemed as if no matter what I did or said, I ended up disappointing him. I'm sorry.
It's cool.
It wasn't cool, or warm, or cold, or any other temperature. It was awful. We'd never had this sort of tension between us. I hated it. Things had changed since he'd asked me to marry him, and I needed them to get back to normal. I needed my friend, the guy who made me laugh even when everything was falling apart. Marco stood, winced, and sat back down.
Would you grab us a couple of beers?
I don't drink beer. It tastes like it has passed through someone already. I screwed up my face and made a gagging sound to make him laugh.
There's wine in the house. You know where it is.
Enzo smirked at me over his shoulder. My shoulders slumped as if they had a will of their own.
Ignore him.
Marco squeezed my hand. Nodding, I hurried inside. I couldn't blame Enzo and Shauna for suspecting I had something to do with their troubles. When I thought about the way I'd treated Enzo in Sicily, I cringed. I'd gone so far as to throw a vase at him to make him hate me. I did too good of a job. By the time I found the beer and poured my wine, Shauna had made Marco a plate of food and was leaning over him, smiling. He said something that made her laugh, and she kissed his forehead. I wasn't jealous, not precisely. While I didn't like the idea of another woman's lips anywhere near him, I knew I had nothing to worry about. She was head over heels for Enzo. The unease in the pit of my stomach had more to do with feeling like an outsider looking in. Until our parents had started pushing for the marriage, I'd cherished my time with the Marchionnis. Besides Maria and Alessio, they were the closest thing to a real family I had. I barely saw my brothers outside of the holidays, and my father never had time for me. Forcing a smile, I squared my shoulders, walked outside, and sat beside Marco. After dinner, I will get you something for the pain.
Thanks. This will help in the meantime. He took a sip of beer and motioned to his plate. Are you sure you're not hungry?
Not really, but it looks delicious.
Try a bite. It's overcooked, but not bad.
Marco cut a piece of the meat and offered it to me. Keeping my eyes locked on his, I leaned in and opened my mouth. He swallowed hard and licked his lips as he fed me. I closed my eyes and savored the flavor. Enzo might not have been the man for me, but he could cook. It's very good.
Yeah.
Marco set the plate in his lap, but not before I noticed the growing bulge in the front of his jeans. I couldn't help but smile. I had little practical experience with sex, but I wasn't that ignorant. He hadn't reacted that way to me since we'd been teenagers. I rather liked the idea I had an effect on him now that we were adults. Maybe a little flirting will get us back to normal.
He cleared his throat. Did Shauna get you set up in a bedroom?
Enzo said I should take Gabe's old room. I hated the way my voice came out, squeaky and unsure, but that's exactly how I felt. Marco and I had never slept under the same roof without parents or bodyguards or overprotective big brothers lurking about.
Shauna's in my room.
A slow grin spread across his face.
It would be much easier to protect you if we shared a bed.
Oh. Could I do that? Share a bed with him without any funny business? Could he? Every reason I'd come up with to turn down his proposal flashed through my head. Then again, everything had changed when I'd walked into the mansion like a beggar. I was here with him despite the risks, despite his involvement with the mafia, despite knowing he'd break my heart. What difference would sleeping next to him make? He nudged my shoulder.
Relax, I'm kidding.
What just happened?
Kidding? I thought you were flirting with me when you let me feed you and moaned like that. I was upping the ante.
His grin faded around the edges as he turned his head and finished his beer. I knew him well enough to recognize the lie. However, I couldn't tell if he'd changed his mind because he thought I was about to reject him, or if he'd chickened out. Maybe both. Rather than smiling and nodding, I imagined what he would say if the tables were turned. Leaning close enough for my lips to brush his earlobe, I whispered, "That's too bad. I was thinking this was the first time we didn't have anyone to cock-block us."
Mother of God.
He pulled back and stared with his mouth hanging open.
You said cock.
I rolled my eyes. I may not know them very well, but I do have 5 brothers. I can have a dirty tongue when I want to.
Dirty mouth. And I'd love to hear more about this dirty mouth of yours.
I put my index finger to my lips and widened my eyes. I only use it in very specific circumstances. He groaned.
You're killing me, Nick. Killing me.
Stop being so dramatic. Blue balls aren't fatal. There's a simple cure that involves your hand and some lotion. Flashing him my best evil grin, I stood, ran my hands over my hips, and walked away.
Wait.
He struggled to follow me. I glanced over my shoulder and winked. Good night, Marco. Chapter 10. Nicolina. My Parisian friends often talked about their sex lives. Though I'd rarely went to the nightclubs with them, I'd learned a lot about the dating game. Or so I thought. Never once, in all their conversations, had anyone mentioned the downside of teasing a man. What do they call the female equivalent to blue balls? I rolled to my back and stared at the ceiling. I shouldn't have whispered in his ear. Sure, I loved the way he looked at me with heavy eyes, and knowing I'd had a physical reaction on him made me feel powerful. However, getting that close to him, smelling him, feeling the warmth of his skin on my lips, left me wanting so much more. To make matters worse, the sounds of Enzo's and Shauna's lovemaking echoed down the hall. The couple had been going at it for what seemed like hours. "Nick," Marco knocked lightly on my door. My stomach fluttered at the sound of his voice. "Come in." He poked his head inside.
Did I wake you?
"No." I let out a humiliating laugh, far too high-pitched to be attractive. Then again, why should I care if I sounded like a hyena? This is Marco. He's seen me shoot milk out my nose. Because I'm in love with him. The thought made me break out in a cold sweat. On some level, I'd always known I loved Marco, but I'd never allowed myself to act on it. Given our current situation, now wasn't the time to start. I had to put a stop to my feelings. We were friends, and I desperately needed our relationship to get back to normal. Anything else would end in disaster. He stepped into the room and closed the door behind him.
I couldn't sleep with all the racket going on at the end of the hall.
Me neither. Honestly, how much longer can they continue?
Hours and hours.
Chuckling, he plopped down beside me.
Want to watch a movie?
He came into my room in the middle of the night to watch TV. Sure. Or we could go for a swim.
Hildy warned me to keep my cut dry for 24 hours, but I'll go downstairs with you if you want to take a dip.
I'd forgotten about his injury. He'd limped around most of the evening. I couldn't ask him to go up and down the stairs again. A movie sounds good. I don't have a swimsuit. He grinned his thinking about sex grin and opened his mouth as if to speak, but snapped it shut. That's odd. I struggled to come up with an explanation for his holding back. My brothers talked about two kinds of women, the fuckable ones and marryable ones. Which was I to him? Which do I want to be? Both? Yes, both sounds nice. I caught myself smiling and forced a frown. What am I thinking? Neither. I am neither to him. He cleared his throat.
What'll it be? Action, horror, rom-com?
I waved my hand. You choose.
What's wrong?
He leaned forward, putting his face in front of mine. I couldn't explain something I didn't fully understand. Rather than trying and ending up sounding like an idiot, I sighed. I'm tired. Your brother and Shauna have finally finished. We should go to sleep. Marco pressed his lips together and gave me a quick nod before grabbing a pillow, punching it twice, and making himself comfortable in my bed. What are you doing? Before he could answer, a door slammed downstairs. The unexpected sound sent a shiver down my spine. Marco bolted for the window and looked outside.
Enzo and Shauna are leaving.
This late? Something must have happened. The memory of hiding in the secret cargo hold replayed through my mind. Call them. Make sure everything is all right. He turned toward me. I don't know what he saw in my expression, but he crossed the room and wrapped me in his arms. This embrace had nothing to do with sex. It was gentle and safe and warm and dangerous.
It's okay, Nick. I'm not going to let anything happen to you.
The thin veneer of pride holding back my emotions snapped. Clinging to him, I struggled to get my words out. You can't promise me that. No one can. Marco tightened his grip on me.
Maybe not, but I can promise you I'll do everything in my power to protect you.
Who will protect you? I pulled back and met his gaze. He kissed my brow.
I can take care of myself.
He can't be that naive. Or maybe he is. Maybe we both are. Since he'd pulled me onto his yacht, I'd become distracted by his handsome smile. I had more important things to worry about than whatever was going on between us. We both did. Do you realize how much trouble your family is in?
What are you talking about?
He might have asked the question, but the look in his eyes told me he knew the answer. Gabe, announcing his breaking ties with the mafia made you look weak. You know what happens to the weak in our world. Why do you think my father is so determined I marry Enzo?
Are you honestly suggesting Pietro Lazio is trying to save my family?
Marco gave me a yeah, right look. Yes, and not all of his reasons are self-serving. He's always been fond of your mother. Marco made a sour face.
Ugh, if you're about to tell me they have a history or I'm secretly your half-brother, I will vomit.
I don't know if they have a history, but you look too much like your father to be anyone else's son. I laughed, despite the seriousness of the conversation. This is how it's supposed to be between us. How familiar are you with the current balance of power between the 5 families? He hitched a shoulder.
My involvement with Sicilian politics is limited. Why don't you fill me in?
There are 2 camps. Your family and the Riccis are on one side. The Abruzzos and the Salvos are on the other. A pang of guilt stole my breath. Telling him this was more of a betrayal to my family than running away.
And the Lazios?
Before I say another word, you have to swear you won't repeat any of this. I'd never had to ask him to keep my secrets. It was an unspoken rule between us, but this was different. This was business. Business that could get people killed.
I swear.
He pretended to pull a zipper across his lips. My father is the tiebreaker, which means the votes go the way he wants. I couldn't meet his gaze. There are other up-and-coming families who will step into the void the Marchionnis leave behind, but there is no way to know how the new capos will affect the balance. Nodding, Marco seemed to take it all in.
How is it you know all of this? I didn't think you were involved.
Men like our fathers don't see women as a threat. They treat us like ornaments. I gave him a weak smile. People don't think twice about having a conversation in front of a vase or sculpture.
I hate to say it, but you're right.
His frown deepened.
Why the marriage? Where does it fit into this?
It keeps at least one Marchionni in the fratellanza. Enzo has always made it clear he wants to step into your father's position when Papa Joe retires.
And that's putting it mildly.
I lowered my voice. The deal my father brokered with your mother is simple. If there is a marriage and Enzo is sitting in your father's chair, the rest of you can leave without bloodshed. He believes once Enzo is his son-in-law, he will be able to control him.
Shit.
He ran his hands over his head. Marco stood and paced the room.
If your father isn't ordering the attacks against my family, do you have any idea who is?
It's hard to say. It could be one of the lesser families staking a claim, the Abruzzos or the Salvos. At this point, I'm willing to admit my father could be involved. Explaining the situation to Marco gave me a new perspective. While I had no desire to marry Enzo, it would solve a lot of problems for people I cared about. Am I being selfish? Going through with it could save Marco and his brothers' lives. And what about Shauna and Enzo? Will he throw away a chance at love to gain power? He stopped walking and turned.
Does it have to be Enzo? Wouldn't it work just as well if you married me?
I don't know, but there are a few problems with that scenario. Our parents have chosen Enzo for the role. They are not going to change their minds. He hitched a shoulder.
We don't give them a choice.
I shook my head. You don't want your father's position. Even if you did and everyone agreed, I don't want to be a mafia wife. There has to be a way out of this, Nick. A way that doesn't involve my best friend marrying my asshole brother. I'd always loved calling him my best friend, but to hear the words out of his mouth while debating the merits of marrying me cut deep. I thought running away would solve my problems, but it only made them worse.
Never a dull moment, is there?
Marco kissed my cheek.
Thank you for explaining this to me. Do you think Gabe knows any of this?
It's hard to say, but you can't tell him. He'll know it came from me, and so will my father when Gabe confronts him.
Nick, relax. I promised I wouldn't repeat what you said, and I meant it.
He stretched out behind me and tugged my back to his chest.
Let's get some sleep.
Easy for you to say.
Okay.
Nuzzling into the pillow, I did my best to ignore his arm around me and his hand dangerously close to my breast. After several minutes, Marco's breathing evened out and the tension drained from his body. I envied his ability to drift off to sleep despite our world spinning out of control. Try as I might, I couldn't turn my brain off. While he hadn't asked outright, I suspected he wanted to talk to Gabe about the situation with my father. Part of me agreed, but the part that had been brainwashed about duty and loyalty and keeping secrets was terrified of the repercussions. At some point, while debating what, if anything, to tell Gabe and listening to Marco breathe, I finally nodded off. What seemed like minutes later, car doors slammed downstairs, followed by shouting. From the sound of it, Enzo and Shauna were having quite the argument. Marco, startled, jumped out of bed and peeked out the window. I stared, trying to understand how he could go from practically comatose to wide awake so quickly. Is someone here? He smoothed his sleep-rumpled hair.
Enzo and Shauna are back. We should find out what's going on.
And I should have conversations with Gabe and Enzo. Go ahead. I'll be right down. He tilted his head, sighed, and left the room. I waited until the door closed and bolted for the bathroom. Splashing cold water on my face helped calm my nerves, but nothing short of a miracle would take away the ache in the center of my chest. Can I betray my family? What will my father do when he finds out? Will he hurt me? Marco? Why did I come here? I've put everyone in more danger. I stared at my reflection as if it would answer the questions. I let Maria and Alessio fill my head with nonsense about love, that's why. As if I knew anything about it. My father wanted to sell me off like a broodmare. Worse, Marco's offer was as much of a business arrangement as my engagement to Enzo. I'd foolishly thought running from my father would give me control of my life, but I'd been wrong. So wrong. Leaving hadn't solved my problems. It had made them worse. Mother Mary, if you're there, I feel so lost. I don't know what to do. Please, give me a sign. I walked downstairs and followed the sound of Marco's voice to an office. Tugging at the hem of the t-shirt I'd borrowed, I said, "Mind if I come in?" "Sure." Shauna smiled at me, but shot Enzo a dirty look. Marco motioned to the computer monitor.
Who is that, and why does she look familiar?
She was at Gabe and Maggie's engagement party. I was hoping one of you would recognize her. Shauna motioned me closer. There were few people I could say I hated, but the woman on the screen topped my list. That's my cousin, Sofia Abruzzo. Marco's mouth fell open.
You're related?
My mother was Tommaso Abruzzo's sister. I clamped my mouth shut before I said too much. I'd tell Marco the full story, but I didn't feel compelled to share it with the others. I was surprised to see her at the party. I wasn't aware the Marchionnis and Abruzzos were on friendly terms.
We aren't.
Marco and Enzo said in unison. Shauna frowned. Do you know what business Sofia Abruzzo would have with the mayor of New Orleans? No. Why? The thought of running into Sofia in New Orleans made my pulse race. We absolutely hated each other. The woman was a slutty psychopath. A violent, slutty psychopath. Shauna typed something into the computer. Another media player window popped up. We watched the video footage of Sofia and an older man exchanging envelopes and engaging in a kiss. Marco made a sour face. That dude is twice her age. Enzo pinched the bridge of his nose. That dude runs the city and has his fingers in the pie of any organized crime that happens in the parish. Shauna glared. Whatever she's doing here, it isn't good. I'd prayed for a sign before I came downstairs, and I may have received one. The Abruzzos paying off an elected official in New Orleans could only mean one thing. They were looking to step in when the Marchionnis stepped out. Considering they already ran most of the east coast of the United States, taking over the port city would make them more powerful than the other families combined. Can you get Gabe on the phone? I need to speak to him. He's a busy man, Nico. Enzo glared, but I didn't take it personally. He and Shauna were arguing. I was an easy target. I understand that, but it involves the Abruzzos. I met Enzo's gaze and lifted my chin. With Sofia in town, do you still believe my father is responsible for the attacks on your family? Enzo ignored me. I pushed into his line of vision. They're here for a reason, Enzo. Instead of brooding, you should be asking yourself what that reason is, and who is supporting them. Marco cursed under his breath and turned to me. Let's go make that call.
Chapter 11. Marco. If I lived to see my 100th birthday, I would never figure out women. Nico had all but made me take a blood oath not to tell anyone about her father's stranglehold on the Fratellanza and his plans to force Enzo to take Gabe's place as capo after he and Nico were married. 3 hours later, she told Gabe herself. Avoiding my gaze, Nico sat back, folded her hands, and said, I'm not sure what, if any of this Enzo knows. Not much, or he would have said something to me by now, Gabe said. He had that right. Enzo had outright asked Gabe to step aside and let him take my father's position. If Enzo had any idea Pietro Lazio would back his proposal, he would have used it as leverage. Nico frowned at the speakerphone. Are you going to tell him? No, he's not. I had no idea what she was playing at, but I didn't like the idea of either of them sweetening the marriage deal. While I didn't want to believe Enzo would kick Shauna to the curb for a seat at the mafia big boys table, I couldn't be sure. Gabe sighed. Nico, I'm not your father. I'm not forcing anyone to make a decision based on fear. I want all of us out of this shit. But if Enzo chooses to stay in, that's on him. It won't be because of some fucked up sense of obligation to keep the rest of us safe. She rubbed her fingers over her lips. I will go along with whatever Enzo wants. The hell you will. Has she lost her mind? After everything you went through to break free, you go back? Nico winced as if I'd struck her. I'm not like you. I didn't grow up in America. Sicily is my home. If the Abruzzos rule the 5 families, she shook her head, innocent people will suffer. So you're going to what? Offer yourself up as sacrifice? Gabe's voice rose. Marco, chill the hell out. Let's talk to Enzo before we crucify anyone. There's more you need to know. Shauna has video footage of Sofia Abruzzo paying off Mayor Clark, Nico said. They are likely making a play to take over your New Orleans operations. We can't let that happen. No, we can't. His voice turned to steel. Shauna came into the office alone. Hi, Gabe. Sorry I'm late to the party. Have Marco and Nico caught you up on the situation with the Abruzzos? Thanks for joining us, Shauna. He sighed. I'm not thrilled that Enzo shared as much as he did about the family business with you, but what's done is done. Considering Maggie knows just about everything, that's rather hypocritical of you. Enzo marched in and sat in my father's chair. Seeing him behind the desk made my heart sink. He's already acting like he's in charge. He's going to agree to the marriage, not because he cares about Nico, because he wants to run the show. I told Maggie the truth about us the night I proposed. Gabe sounded defensive. I glanced between Enzo and Shauna. I hadn't stopped to consider how difficult it would be to tell a woman about the family business. Yet another reason I found Nico appealing. She understood the situation in ways outsiders couldn't. Hell, she understood it better than I did. Enzo said, "You shared our secrets with her because you loved her and planned to spend the rest of your life with her. Funny, I did much the same." Nico's mouth fell open and she turned to me. For the first time since we'd argued upstairs, I thought I knew what she was thinking. Enzo had admitted he was in love with Shauna, which could possibly put an end to Pietro Lazio's demands. However, the object of his affections did not seem impressed. Shauna rolled her eyes and shook her head. I had no idea what had happened between the two of them while they were out, but it obviously wasn't good. They'd seemed so happy together before they'd left the house. Hell, they couldn't keep their hands off each other. So much so, I was sure they'd worn ruts in the bedroom floor. What the hell happened? Gabe said, "Right. Now can we discuss the Abruzzos?" "By all means." Enzo stared at Shauna, but she turned away. "I knew the Abruzzos were going to be a problem, but I didn't see this coming." Gabe paused, likely still processing the information. "My guess is they want to take our place in New Orleans." That he'd used Nico's words made me nervous. Gabe was feeding Enzo the information we discussed to see if he'd bite, to see if he wanted our father's position and everything that went along with it. Gabe said, "Enzo, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. With the mayor in their pocket, the local authorities will turn a blind eye. I'm more concerned with the fact our homes and businesses are here. I can't imagine the Abruzzos will want us to remain in the city." "I agree. They aren't known to share." Nico sighed, and I couldn't help but wonder about her relationship, or lack thereof, with her mother's side of the family. "Do you honestly believe they will run you out of town?" Shauna glanced between us. "Once they have a solid foothold, yeah, I do." Gabe's voice hardened. "Like it or not, this business with the mayor is Pop's bad karma coming back to bite us in the ass." I rested my elbows on my thighs and clasped my hands. "Before we get too far down the sins of the father road, how can we stop this?" Nico sighed. "If Enzo and I get married, the other families will support the union. The Abruzzos are strong, but they can't stand against everyone." The fuck is she thinking? Shauna dipped her chin. "My goal is for us to go legit, not force people into a marriage they don't want," Gabe said. "Your mother has been working with Pietro Lazio. She plans to put Enzo in your place as head of the family once he and Nico are married." Shauna's words hit me like a high-caliber bullet to the brain. She's in love with him, but she freaking handed Enzo to Nico on a silver platter? What the hell happened between them tonight? Not only that, but she let the damn cat out of the bag. It's over. Son of a bitch. I've lost Nico before I even had her. I rubbed my breastbone to ease the ache. Somewhere along the line, my friendship with Nico had morphed into something more. Something that scared the living shit out of me. Something I wasn't ready to let go. Nico nodded. "She's right." Gabe's voice rose. "Enzo? I planned to tell you during this call. Ma thought if I took over, I could cut the rest of you loose without any bloodshed." Gabe cleared his throat. "Is this what you want? To take over? Does it matter?" Enzo swallowed hard and pressed his lips into a tight line. Holy shit, he looks like he's going to cry. He doesn't want it. My mind blanked and I broke out in a cold sweat. For as long as I could remember, Enzo had made noise about wanting to be the next Marchionni capo. He'd spent his entire life trying to prove himself to my father, only to be pushed aside in favor of first Joe Jr. and then Gabe. Never in a million years had I thought he'd give up the chance to lord over the rest of us. Gabe exhaled a deep breath. "I'm willing to work with you for now and step aside once things are settled. What will it be? Do you want this or not?" Enzo hesitated and my heart slammed against my chest. My entire life hung on his answer. No, not my entire life. I have feelings for Nico, but that doesn't mean I'm in love with her. Sure, it'd hurt like a bitch to see her marry my brother, but I'd get over it. Wouldn't I? Who am I kidding? Having Nico for a sister-in-law would freaking kill me. Nico filled the silence. Before you answer that, know that my father will side with the Abruzzos if there is no wedding. I shot her a pleading look. She didn't want the marriage. She'd done everything in her power to get out of it. Why was she pushing him for it now? I figured as much. But that doesn't change my mind about sentencing the two of you to a life of unhappiness, Gabe said. Enzo, do you want to take over? No. I blew out of breath. Thank Christ. Shauna stood. You said you did. At one point I thought so, but I've changed my mind. Enzo gave her a what the fuck look, and so did I. She ignored him and leaned closer to the speakerphone. Gabe, give him some time to think it over. It's been a rough night. What the hell is wrong with these women? Are they in cahoots to make us crazy? I don't need time. I know what I want. Enzo nodded to Nico. You don't want to be married to me, do you? No. She glanced at me and sighed. But I'm willing to go through with it to prevent anyone I care about from getting hurt. I couldn't sit still another second. I paced the floor but kept an eye on Nico. Something else was going on behind those beautiful brown eyes of hers, and I intended to find out what. She's right. Think about what this could mean for your family and the people in Comiso. Shauna's voice rose. Enzo glared. I said no, Gabe said. Why don't the two of you work this out and call me back? No. Staring at Shauna, Enzo said, I don't want it. Gabe sighed. Great, now that's settled. How do we bring the Abruzzos and Mayor Carter down? The conversation continued around me, but I heard every third word or so. Enzo had turned down the position and the marriage, but I wasn't sure where that left me and Nico. Nothing had changed on my side, but she seemed downright disappointed. Oh, you idiot. She isn't disappointed. She never wanted to marry the blockhead. She's scared. The weird thing was, she'd seemed okay by the pool. Hell, she'd seemed more than okay. The woman had shocked the shit out of me with her dirty tongue. I cracked a grin. Her and her mixed-up idioms. I walked behind Nico and rested my hand on her shoulder. She sighed and laced her fingers with mine. The tiny gesture gave me hope, but more than that, it gave me the courage to do what I should have done a long time ago. I leaned close and whispered, I don't want you to marry Enzo. She turned and stared. Let's see where this thing between us goes. Her mouth moved wordlessly before she glanced back to Enzo and Shauna. The couple might have been at war, but they both watched us with the same curious expression. A rustling noise filled the phone line, followed by Gabe's muffled voice. I'm going to need to wrap this up soon. The doctor is here to examine Pops. How is he? I asked. The same as before. He has good days and bad days. Enzo asked. Is Pops well enough to answer a few questions? Gabe said, If not now, he will be tomorrow. Why? You're aware he's made many sizable contributions to Carter's election campaign. Enzo nodded to me. And even larger donations to Carter's offshore accounts. I grinned. Without the mayor, the Abruzzos will have a hell of a time taking over New Orleans, no matter who's backing them in Sicily. Gabe laughed, the first real laugh I'd heard from him since the wedding reception. And the mayor can't take us down without drowning with us. We'll need proof, Enzo said. I rubbed my hands together. Give me a few hours in the Marchionni Corp server, and I'll have your proof. But what do we do about the Abruzzos? If they're serious about pushing us out, they'll look for another way in when Carter falls. Gabe cleared his throat. I wasn't going to tell you two until I had more definitive information, but the informant who came forward about Joe's murder claims the Abruzzo family ordered the hit. My knees threatened to go out from beneath me. My eldest brother and his wife had been murdered in a staged car crash a couple of years before. Not a day went by that I didn't think about him or wish I could pick up the phone and ask for advice. The police had ruled their deaths an accident, but my father had always believed it was a hit. It seemed he was right. The question is, how do...
Chapter 12. Nicolina. I'd attended many funerals in my 26 years on the planet. The first had been my grandmother's, though it was so long ago that I wasn't sure which of my memories were real and which I'd conjured up in my imagination after listening to stories. However, this was not the case for Joe and Rebecca Marchioni's funeral. The horrible sadness of that day had haunted me for over 2 years. Joe Jr., the oldest of the Marchionni boys, had been my first crush. Though he was 10 years older than me, I'd fallen hard for the enigmatic teen at the ripe old age of 6. I'd followed him around like a hungry kitten for an entire summer. When his family had returned to the United States, I begged my father to order Joe to marry me. 2 years later, Marco had told me Joe was to wed an Irish girl named Rebecca, and that they were going to have a baby. I hated her, until the day I met her. Unlike the other girls the older Marchionni boys had dated, she was always kind to me. The first time I'd walked into St. Louis Cathedral was their wedding. The last time was their funeral. Memories of that day flooded me. 2 caskets covered with white roses. 3 orphaned children too stunned to understand what they'd lost. 5 mafia bosses with tears in their eyes. Mafia bosses including my uncle, Tommaso Abruzzo. "Hey." Marco met me outside on the pool deck and slid his arms around my waist. Turning to face him, I whispered, "Are you all right?" He pressed his brow to mine and closed his eyes. "No, but I will be once we find a way to make Abruzzo pay." "Marco." The tone of his voice sent a chill down my spine. Justice, or revenge, worked considerably different in the mafia than in normal circles. While the Cosa Nostra believed in an eye for an eye, they preferred to know and approve of said eye gouging ahead of time. Plus, their trials didn't operate like a court of law in the United States. Evidence often came down to hearsay, and verdicts depended on who owed who favors. His shoulders shook. "I miss him every fucking day. And Rebecca, she was innocent. The Abruzzos orphaned 3 children. For what? Because Joe wanted out." "Like Gabe does now." I pulled back and met his eyes. "Did Joe tell you that?" "No. He told Dante, and my father confirmed it." "And now that Gabe is pushing to leave, the Abruzzos are coming after your family again." I wanted to call and warn my father, but I didn't dare risk giving away my hiding place. Not to mention, he might already know Joe had wanted out, and if that was the case, he'd likely known about the hit. "Regardless of the circumstances, the Abruzzos will answer for this." "Promise me you won't do anything foolish." I had to talk some sense into him. The last thing anyone needed was Marco getting in over his head. "Promise me you will." He pulled away and moved as if to kneel, but winced. "Hang on, this isn't going the way I imagined it." My heart beat hard enough to crack my ribs. I pressed my hand to my chest, but nothing could stop the riot going on inside me. "He's proposing?" "Marco?" "Don't say anything until you hear me out." His ears turned bright red as he scooted a chair close and half knelt, half sat. I pushed aside my feelings for him and focused on the reality of the situation. In other words, I told myself, this wasn't real. He was doing this to save me. I'd seen it a million times before. He had a terminal case of hero complex. Marco was every girl's dream, which was probably why he'd had so many women over the years. And he's always sworn he'd never settle down. The air left my lungs and I struggled to replace it. The news about Joe Jr. was difficult for me to hear, but Marco had taken it much harder. "You've had a shock. This isn't the time for—" "This thing with the Abruzzos got me thinking. We don't have all the time in the world to wait for the perfect moment, Nick." He tensed his jaw. "Let me say what I need to, please." Is this about revenge? I had to put a stop to this before he crossed a line we couldn't uncross. I dropped to my knees in front of him. Marco, don't do this. He furrowed his brow.
Why?
Because doing the right thing for the wrong reasons is wrong.
I can't think of a better reason to marry someone than wanting to spend time with my best friend. So what if that happens to stop you from marrying an asshole and stop some mob war in the process?
He wiggled his brows.
Come on, what do you say? Marry me.
I would have leaped into his arms and covered his face with kisses if he'd said he loved me. But he didn't. Spending time with my best friend wasn't the same thing. Our marriage would have an expiration date. This was a business arrangement, a way to stop my father from forcing me into a life I didn't want. A chilling thought banged around in my head and fell out of my mouth. If the Abruzzos fall and the Marchionnis leave, which families will rise to take their places? Marco stared.
I don't know.
Who will my father want to make alliances with next? Who will he sell me to? Names and faces spun through my mind like images on a slot machine. Several less powerful families had made it known they wanted a seat at the table. Which one would my father choose? Which man would he demand I marry next? A total stranger? Someone 2 or 3 times my age?
No one, if you're already married to me.
Yes. The word fell out of my mouth before I could stop it. He was right. There were far worse reasons to commit your life to someone than spending time with your best friend. Marco's face lit up like St. Peter's Square on Christmas Eve.
Yeah?
Yes. He patted his pants pockets, likely looking for his phone. Wait, before you tell anyone, we need to work out the rules. His hands stilled.
Rules?
Yes, rules, because I need to protect my heart. We can go through with a fake marriage because you promised me nothing would ruin our friendship. But we should have terms. That way we're clear on the expectations.
Fake marriage. Right.
He glanced away.
Lay them on me.
We need a definite time limit. I tapped my lips. How long can I play platonic house with him and somehow survive when it ends?
6 months. You're doing this to keep your father from forcing you to marry someone else. Shouldn't we plan to end the marriage when the threat is gone?
That could take years. I couldn't do it. I couldn't bottle up my feelings for him. But if I didn't, I wouldn't want to walk away. His eyes widened.
9 months.
The tone of his voice told me the mere mention of spending years with me horrified him. I couldn't bring myself to meet his gaze. Marco cleared his throat.
What else?
You mentioned not consummating the union is a failsafe, but it isn't. We can petition the church based on the fact I'm still a virgin, but... Marco whipped his head back to me.
You're a virgin?
Biting my lip, I nodded.
How is that even possible?
You should ask how it's possible I could have had sex. I grinned at his wide-eyed expression. I've been surrounded by bodyguards my entire life. He moved his hands as if trying to grasp an invisible object.
But you've dated guys.
Yes, under the illusion of privacy, but my father's men were never far away. His reaction made my cheeks burn. You're behaving like I have a terminal disease. Marco tossed his head back in laughter.
No, not terminal. There's a simple cure.
I smacked his arm and stood. As I was saying, the entire notion of proving virginity through a physical exam is a myth. There is no actual medical test to verify a woman has never had intercourse. His grin broadened.
We could do the deed and still have the marriage dissolved?
Doing deeds complicates things. Now stop thinking about sex and focus. I shook my head. We would need to prove the marriage was entered into under duress or false pretenses.
Easy. We can sign a document outlining the reasons we're doing it.
Any doubt I had about his intentions vanished. I'd sign whatever he put in front of me, but I wouldn't read it. There were some things I didn't want to know, like his true feelings for me. Sure. Marco took my hand.
Let's go.
Where? I swear on my mother's grave, if he says he's taking me to bed, I'm going to stab him. He all but dragged me through the kitchen.
Unless you have your birth certificate with you, I need to call a guy and have one made. Then I'm going to the courthouse. Louisiana has a waiting period before we can tie the knot.
I stopped walking. You're going alone?
Only one of us needs to be present to get the license.
How do you know so much about the laws?
I'm an attorney. And I might have looked it up.
His ears turned red again. Marco Marchionni was embarrassed. If I didn't know better, I would have sworn he was excited about our upcoming wedding. The funny thing was, I had butterflies. Fake or not, I was about to marry the man I loved.
We should finish the rules first,
he groaned.
My rule is we have no frickin' rules.
Laughing, I looped my arm with his.
Fine. Let's go call a guy about a thing and head to the courthouse like Bonnie and Claude. Clyde. It's Bonnie and Clyde. And we should come up with another outlaw couple. One that didn't die young.
I tapped my lips.
Velma and Louis?
Thelma and Louise
died at the end of the movie.
He gave me side-eye.
I've never seen it. I'll add that to the list of things you've never done, but are going to do as soon as we're married.
Marco turned, swept me off my feet, and carried me toward the stairs.
Hey, put me down!
I pretended to struggle, but I enjoyed goofing around with him, even if temporarily being in his arms would permanently break my heart.
What else is on this list?
You'll have to wait until we're married to find out. He used his bedroom voice, the one that told me he was thinking about sex again. What was that you said about waiting for the perfect moment? Nuzzling into his neck, I whispered, Why put off until tomorrow when you can do me right now?
Marco chuckled. One day I'm going to sit you down and teach you every American idiom I know.
I smiled against his warm skin. I messed that one up on purpose.